Book Third, Chapter Fourth, Parts 1 to 3 of Tono-Bungay. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by William Tomko. Tono-Bungay by H. G. Wells, Book Third, Chapter Fourth, Parts 1 to 3. Chapter the Fourth. How I Stole the Heaps of Quap from Mordet Island. 1. "We got to make a fight for it," said my uncle. "We got to face the music." I remember that even at the sight of him I had a sense of impending calamity. He sat under the electric light with the shadow of his hair making bars down his face. He looked shrunken, and as though his skin had suddenly got loose and yellow. The decorations of the room seemed to have lost freshness, and outside the blinds were up. There was not so much fog as a dun darkness. One saw the dingy outlines of the chimneys opposite quite distinctly, and then a sky of such brown as only London can display. "I saw a placard," I said. "More ponderevity." "That's Boom," he said. "Boom and his damned newspapers. He's trying to fight me down. Ever since I offered to buy the Daily Decorator he's been at me. And he thinks consolidating do-ut cut down the ads. He wants everything, damn him. He's got no sense of dealing. I'd like to bash his face." "Well," I said, "what's to be done?" "Keep going," said my uncle. "I'll smash Boom yet," he said, with sudden savagery. "Nothing else?" I asked. "We got to keep going. There's a scare on. Did you notice the rooms? Half the people out there this morning are reporters, and if I talk they touch it up. They didn't used to touch things up. Now they put in character touches, insulting you. Don't know what journalism's coming to. It's all Boom's doing." He cursed Lord Boom with considerable imaginative vigour. "Well," said I, "what can he do?" "Shove us up against time, George. Make money tight for us. He's been handling a lot of money, and he tightens us up." "We're sound?" "Oh, we're sound, George. Trust me for that. But all the same, there's such a lot of imagination in these things. We're sound enough." "That's not it." He blew. "Damn Boom!" he said, and his eyes over his glasses met mine defiantly. "We can't, I suppose, run close hauled for a bit-stop expenditure?" "Where?" "Well, Crest Hill." "What?" he shouted. "Me stop Crest Hill for Boom?" He waved a fist as if to hit his inkpot, and controlled himself with difficulty. He spoke at last in reasonable voice. "If I did," he said, "he'd kick up a fuss. It's no good, even if I wanted to. Everybody's watching the place. If I was to stop building we'd be down in a week." He had an idea. "I wish I could do something to start a strike or something. No such luck. Treat those workmen a sight too well. No, sink or swim, Crest Hill goes on until we're under water." I began to ask questions and irritated him instantly. "Oh, dash these explanations, George!" he cried. "You only make things look rottener than they are. It's your way. It isn't a case of figures. We're all right. There's only one thing we got to do." "Yes?" "Show value, George. That's where this quap comes in. That's why I fell in so readily with what you brought to me week before last. Here we are. We got our option on the perfect filament, and all we want's canadium. Nobody knows there's more canadium in the world than will go on the edge of a sixpence except me and you. Nobody has an idea the perfect filament's more than just a bit of theorising. 50 tons of quap and we'd turn that bit of theorising into something. We'd make the lamp trade sit on its tail and howl. We'd put Ediswan and all of 'em into a parcel without last year's trousers and a hat, and swap 'em off for a pot of geraniums. See? We do it through business organisations. And there you are. See? Capern's Patent Filament. The ideal and the real, George. We'll do it. We'll bring it off. And then we'll give such a facer to Boom he'll think for 50 years. He's laying up for our London and African meeting. Let him. He can turn the whole paper on to us. He says the business organisation's shares aren't worth 52 and we quote 'em at 84. Well, here we are gettin' ready for him, loading our gun." His pose was triumphant. "Yes," I said, "that's all right. But I can't help thinking where should we be if we hadn't just by accident got Capern's perfect filament. Because you know it was an accident, my buying up that." He crumpled up his nose into an expression of impatient distaste at my unreasonableness. "And after all, the meeting's in June and you haven't begun to get the quap. After all, we've still got to load our gun. They start on Tuesday." "Have they got the brig?" "They've got a brig." "Gordon Nasmyth?" I doubted. "Safe as a bank," he said. "More I see of that man the more I like him. All I wish is we'd get a steamer instead of a sailing ship." "And," I went on, "you seem to overlook what used to weigh with us a bit, this Canadian side of the business, and the Capern chance has rushed you off your legs. After all, it's stealing, and in its way an international outrage. They've got 2 gunboats on the coast." I jumped up and went and stared out at the fog. "And by Jove, it's about our only chance. I didn't dream." I turned on him. "I've been up in the air," I said. "Heaven knows where I haven't been. And here's our only chance, and you give it to that adventurous lunatic to play in his own way. In a brig. Well, you had a voice. I wish I'd been in this before. We ought to have run out a steamer to Lagos or one of those West Coast places and done it from there. Fancy a brig in the Channel at this time of year, if it blows southwest." "I dessay you'd have shoved it, George. Still, you know, George, I believe in him." "Yes," I said. "Yes, I believe in him too, in a way. Still—" We took up a telegram that was lying on his desk and opened it. His face became a livid yellow. He put the flimsy paper down with a slow, reluctant movement and took off his glasses. "George," he said, "the luck's against us." "What?" He grimaced with his mouth, in the queerest way at the telegram. "That." I took it up and read: "Motor smash compound fracture of the leg Gordon Nasmyth. What price moored at now?" For a moment neither of us spoke. "That's all right," I said at last. "Eh?" said my uncle. "I'm going. I'll get that quap or bust." 2 I had a ridiculous persuasion that I was saving the situation. "I'm going," I said quite consciously and dramatically. I saw the whole affair—how shall I put it?—in American colours. I sat down beside him. "Give me all the data you've got," I said, "and I'll pull this thing off." "But nobody knows exactly where. Nasmyth does, and he'll tell me." "He's been very close," said my uncle, and regarded me. "He'll tell me all right, now he's smashed." He thought. "I believe he will." "George," he said, "if you pull this thing off, once or twice before you've stepped in, with that sort of whoosh of yours—" He left the sentence unfinished. "Give me that notebook," I said, "and tell me all you know. Where's the ship? Where's Pollack? And where's that telegram from? If that quap's to be got, I'll get it or bust. If you'll hold on here until I get back with it." And so it was I jumped into the wildest adventure of my life. I requisitioned my uncle's best car forthwith. I went down that night to the place of despatch named on Nasmyth's telegram, Bampton S.O. Oxon, routed him out with a little trouble from that centre, made things right with him and got his explicit directions, and I was inspecting the Maud Mary with young Pollack, his cousin and aide, the following afternoon. She was rather a shock to me and not at all in my style, a beast of a brig inured to the potato trade, and she reeked from end to end with the faint, subtle smell of raw potatoes, so that it prevailed even over the temporary smell of new paint. She was a beast of a brig, all hold and dirty framework, and they had ballasted her with old iron and old rails and iron sleepers, and got a miscellaneous lot of spades and iron wheelbarrows against the loading of the quap. I thought her over with Pollack, one of those tall blond young men who smoke pipes and don't help much, and then by myself, and as a result I did my best to sweep Gravesend clean of wheeling planks, and got in as much cord and small rope as I could for lashing. I had an idea we might need to run up a jetty. In addition to much ballast she held, remotely hidden in a sort of inadvertent way, a certain number of ambiguous cases which I didn't examine, but which I gathered were a provision against the need of a trade. The captain was a most extraordinary creature, under the impression we were after copper ore. He was a Roumanian Jew, with twitching, excitable features, who had made his way to a certificate after some preliminary naval experiences in the Black Sea. The mate was an Essex man of impenetrable reserve. The crew were astoundingly ill-clad and destitute and dirty, most of them youths, unwashed, out of colliers. One, the cook, was a mulatto, and one, the best-built fellow of them all, was a Breton. There was some subterfuge about our position on board. I forget the particulars now. I was called the supercargo and Pollack was the steward. This added to the piratical flavour that insufficient funds and Gordon Nasmyth's original genius had already given the enterprise. Those 2 days of bustle at Gravesend, under dingy skies, in narrow, dirty streets, were a new experience for me. It is like nothing else in my life. I realised that I was a modern and a civilised man. I found the food filthy and the coffee horrible. The whole town stank in my nostrils. The landlord of the Good Intent on the quay had a stand-up quarrel with us before I could get even a hot bath, and the bedroom I slept in was infested by a quantity of exotic but voracious flat parasites called locally bugs, in the walls, in the woodwork, everywhere. I fought them with insect powder, and found them comatose in the morning. I was dipping down into the dingy underworld of the contemporary state, and I liked it no better than I did my first dip into it when I stayed with my Uncle Nicodemus Frapp at the bakery at Chatham, where, by the by, we had to deal with cockroaches of a smaller, darker variety, and also with bugs of sorts. Let me confess that through all this time before we started I was immensely self-conscious, and that Beatrice played the part of audience in my imagination throughout. I was, as I say, saving the situation, and I was acutely aware of that. The evening before we sailed, instead of revising our medicine chest as I had intended, I took the car and ran across country to Lady Grove to tell my aunt of the journey I was making, dress and astonish Lady Osprey by an after-dinner call. The 2 ladies were at home and alone beside a big fire that seemed wonderfully cheerful after the winter night. I remember the effect of the little parlour in which they sat as very bright and domestic. Lady Osprey, in a costume of mauve and lace, sat on a chintz sofa and played an elaborately spread-out Patience by the light of a tall, shaded lamp. Beatrice, in a whiteness that showed her throat, smoked a cigarette in an armchair and read with a lamp at her elbow. The room was white-panelled and chintz-curtained. About those 2 bright centres of light were warm, dark shadow, in which a circular mirror shone like a pool of brown water. I carried off my raid by behaving like a slave of etiquette. There were moments when I think I really made Lady Osprey believe that my call was an unavoidable necessity, that it would have been negligent of me not to call just how and when I did, but at the best those were transitory moments. They received me with disciplined amazement. Lady Osprey was interested in my face and scrutinised the scar. Beatrice stood behind her solicitude. Our eyes met, and in hers I could see startled interrogations. "I'm going," I said, "to the west coast of Africa." They asked questions, but it suited my mood to be vague. "We've interests there. It is urgent I should go. I don't know when I may return." After that I perceived Beatrice surveyed me steadily. The conversation was rather difficult. I embarked upon lengthy thanks for their kindness to me after my accident. I tried to understand Lady Osprey's game of patience, but it didn't appear that Lady Osprey was anxious for me to understand her patience. I came to the verge of taking my leave. "You needn't go yet," said Beatrice abruptly. She walked across to the piano, took a pile of music from the cabinet near, surveyed Lady Osprey's back, and with a gesture to me dropped it all deliberately on to the floor. "Must talk," she said, kneeling close to me as I helped her to pick it up. "Turn my pages, at the piano." "I can't read music." "Turn my pages." Presently we were at the piano, and Beatrice was playing with noisy inaccuracy. She glanced over her shoulder, and Lady Osprey had resumed her patience. The old lady was very pink, and appeared to be absorbed in some attempt to cheat herself without our observing it. "Isn't West Africa a vile climate? Are you going to live there? Why are you going?" Beatrice asked these questions in a low voice and gave me no chance to answer. Then, taking a rhythm from the music before her, she said, "At the back of the house is a garden, a door in the wall, on the lane. Understand?" I turned over the pages without any effect on her playing. "When?" I asked. She dealt in chords. "I wish I could play this," she said. "Midnight." She gave her attention to the music for a time. "You may have to wait." "I'll wait." She brought her playing to an end by, as schoolboys say, stashing it up. "I can't play to night," she said, standing up and meeting my eyes. "I wanted to give you a parting voluntary." "Was that Wagner, Beatrice?" asked Lady Osprey, looking up from her cards. "It sounded very confused." I took my leave. I had a curious twinge of conscience as I parted from Lady Osprey. Either a first intimation of middle age or my inexperience in romantic affairs was to blame, but I felt a very distinct objection to the prospect of invading this good lady's premises from the garden door. I motored up to the pavilion, found Cothope reading in bed, told him for the first time of West Africa, spent an hour with him in settling all the outstanding details of Lord Roberts B, and left that in his hands to finish against my return. I sent the motor back to Lady Grove, and, still wearing my fur coat, for the January night was damp and bitterly cold, walked to Bedley Corner. I found the lane to the back of the Dower House without any difficulty, and was at the door in the wall with 10 minutes to spare. I lit a cigar and fell to walking up and down. This queer flavour of intrigue, this nocturnal garden door business, had taken me by surprise and changed my mental attitudes. I was startled out of my egotistical pose and thinking intently of Beatrice, of that elfin quality in her that always pleased me, that always took me by surprise, that had made her, for example, to instantly conceive this meeting. She came within a minute of midnight. The door opened softly and she appeared, a short, grey figure in a motor coat of sheepskin, bareheaded to the cold drizzle. She flitted up to me, and her eyes were shadows in her dusky face. "Why are you going to West Africa?" she asked at once. "Business crisis. I have to go." "You're not going? You're coming back?" "3 or 4 months," I said, "at most." "Then it's nothing to do with me?" "Nothing," I said. "Why should it have?" "Oh, that's all right. One never knows what people think or what people fancy." She took me by the arm. "Let's go for a walk," she said. I looked about me at darkness and rain. "That's all right," she laughed. "We can go along the lane and into the old walking road. Do you mind? Of course you don't. My head, it doesn't matter. One never meets anybody." "How do you know?" "I've wandered like this before. Of course. Did you think—" She nodded her head back at her home. "That's all?" "No, by Jove!" I cried. "It's manifest it isn't." She took my arm and turned me down the lane. "Night's my time," she said, by my side. "There's a touch of the werewolf in my blood. One never knows in these old families. I've wondered often. Here we are, anyhow, alone in the world, just darkness and cold and a sky of clouds and wet, and we—together. I like the wet on my face and hair, don't you? When do you sail? I told her tomorrow. Oh, well, there's no tomorrow now, you and I. She stopped and confronted me. You don't say a word except to answer. No, I said. Last time you did all the talking. Like a fool. Now, we looked at each other's two dim faces. You're glad to be here? I'm glad. I'm beginning to be. It's more than glad. She put her hands on my shoulders and drew me down to kiss her. Ah, she said, and for a moment or so we just clung to one another. That's all, she said, releasing herself. What bundles of clothes we are to-night. I felt we should kiss some day again. Always. The last time was ages ago. Among the fern stalks. Among the bracken, you remember. And your lips were cold. Were mine? The same lips, after so long, after so much. And now let's trudge through this blotted-out world together for a time. Yes, let me take your arm. Just trudge, see? Hold tight to me, because I know the way. And don't talk. Don't talk. Unless you want to talk. Let me tell you things. You see, dear, the whole world is blotted out. It's dead and gone. And we're in this place. This dark, wild place. We're dead. Or all the world is dead. No, we're dead. No one can see us. We're shadows. We've got out of our positions, out of our bodies, and together. That's the good thing of it, together. But that's why the world can't see us and why we hardly see the world. Shh! Is it all right? It's all right, I said. We stumbled along for a time in a close silence. We passed a dim-lit, rain-veiled window. The silly world, she said. The silly world. It eats and sleeps. If the wet didn't patter so from the trees, we'd hear it snoring. It's dreaming such stupid things, stupid judgments. It doesn't know we are passing, we two, free of it, clear of it, you and I. We pressed against each other reassuringly. I'm glad we're dead, she whispered. I'm glad we're dead. I was tired of it, dear. I was so tired of it, dear, and so entangled. She stopped abruptly. We splashed through a string of puddles. I began to remember things I had meant to say. Look here, I cried. I want to help you beyond measure. You are entangled. What is the trouble? I asked you to marry me. You said you would. But there's something. My thoughts sounded clumsy as I said them. Is it something about my position? Or is it something, perhaps, about some other man? There was an immense assenting silence. You've puzzled me so. At first, I mean quite early, I thought you meant to make me marry you. I did. And then? Tonight, she said, after a long pause. I can't explain. No, I can't explain. I love you. But explanations. Tonight, my dear, here we are in the world alone, and the world doesn't matter. Nothing matters. Here I am in the cold with you, and my bed away there, deserted. I tell you, I will tell you when things enable me to tell you, and soon enough they will. But tonight I won't. I won't. She left my side and went in front of me. She turned upon me. Look here, she said, I insist upon your being dead. Do you understand? I'm not joking. Tonight you and I are out of life. It's our time together. There may be other times, but this we won't spoil. We're in Hades, if you like, where there's nothing to hide and nothing to tell. No bodies even. No bothers. We loved each other, down there, and were kept apart, but now it doesn't matter. It's over. If you won't agree to that, I will go home. I began. I know. Oh, my dear, if you'd only understand, I understand. If you'd only not care and love me tonight." "I do love you," I said. "Then love me," she answered, "and leave all the things that bother you. Love me. Here I am." "But—" "No," she said. "Well, have your way." So she carried her point, and we wandered into the night together, and Beatrice talked to me of love. I'd never heard a woman before in all my life who could talk of love, who could lay bare and develop and touch with imagination all that mass of fine emotion every woman, it may be, hides. She had read of love, she had thought of love, a thousand sweet lyrics had sounded through her brain and left fine fragments in her memory. She poured it out, all of it, shamelessly, skilfully, for me. I cannot give any sense of that talk. I cannot even tell how much of the delight of it was the magic of her voice, the glow of her near presence. And always we walked swathed warmly through a chilly air, along dim, interminable greasy roads, with never a soul abroad it seemed to us, never a beast in the fields. "Why do people love each other?" I said. "Why not? But why do I love you? Why is your voice better than any voice, your face sweeter than any face?" "And why do I love you?" she asked. "Not only what is fine in you, but what isn't. Why do I love your dullness, your arrogance? For I do. To—night I love the very raindrops on the fur of your coat." So we talked, and at last, very wet, still glowing but a little tired, we parted at the garden door. We had been wandering for 2 hours in our strange irrational community of happiness, and all the world about us, and particularly Lady Osprey and her household, had been asleep, and dreaming of anything rather than Beatrice in the night and rain. She stood in the doorway, a muffled figure with eyes that glowed. "Come back," she whispered. "I shall wait for you." She hesitated. She touched the lapel of my coat. "I love you now," she said, and lifted her face to mine. I held her to me and was a-tremble from top to toe. "Oh God!" I cried. "And I must go." She slipped from my arms and paused, regarding me. For an instant the world seemed full of fantastic possibilities. "Yes, go," she said, and vanished and slammed the door upon me, leaving me alone like a man new fallen from fairyland in the black darkness of the night. 3. That expedition to Mordet Island stands apart from all the rest of my life, detached, a piece by itself, with an atmosphere of its own. It would, I suppose, make a book by itself. It has made a fairly voluminous official report, but so far as this novel of mine goes, it is merely an episode, a contributory experience, and I mean to keep it at that. Vile weather, an impatient fretting against unbearable slowness and delay, sea-sickness, general discomfort, and humiliating self-revelation are the master values of these memories. I was sick all through the journey out. I don't know why. It was the only time I was ever sea-sick, and I have seen some pretty bad weather since I became a boat builder. But that phantom smell of potatoes was peculiarly vile to me. Coming back on the brig, we were all ill, every one of us, so soon as we got to sea, poisoned, I firmly believe, by quap. On the way out most of the others recovered in a few days, but the stuffiness below, the coarse food, the cramped dirty accommodation kept me, if not actually sea-sick, in a state of acute physical wretchedness the whole time. The ship abounded in cockroaches and more intimate vermin. I was cold all the time until after we passed Cape Verde, and I became steamily hot. I had been too preoccupied with Beatrice and my keen desire to get the Maud Mary under way at once to consider a proper wardrobe for myself, and in particular I lacked a coat. Heavens, how I lacked that coat! And moreover I was cooped up with 2 of the worst bores in Christendom, Pollack and the captain. Pollack, after conducting his illness in a style better adapted to the capacity of an opera house than a small compartment, suddenly got insupportably well and breezy, and produced a manly pipe in which he smoked a tobacco as blond as himself, and divided his time almost equally between smoking it and trying to clean it. "There's only three things you can clean a pipe with," he used to remark with a twist of paper in hand. "The best's a feather, the second's a straw, and the third's a girl's hairpin. I never seen such a ship. You can't find any of 'em. Last time I came this way I did find hairpins anyway, and found 'em on the floor of the captain's cabin. Regular deposit, eh? Feeling better?" At which I usually swore. "Oh, you'll be all right soon. Don't mind my puffin' a bit, eh?" He never tired of asking me to have a hand at Nap. Good game. Makes you forget it, and that's half the battle. He would sit swaying with the rolling of the ship, and suck at his pipe of blond tobacco, and look with an inexpressibly sage but somnolent blue eye at the captain by the hour together. "Captain's a card," he would say over and over again, as the outcome of these meditations. He'd like to know what we're up to. He'd like to know no end. That did seem to be the captain's ruling idea, but he also wanted to impress me with the notion that he was a gentleman of good family, and to air a number of views adverse to the English, to English literature, to the English Constitution, and the like. He had learnt the sea in the Roumanian Navy, and English out of a book. He would still at times pronounce the e's at the end of there and here. He was a naturalised Englishman, and he drove me into a reluctant and uncongenial patriotism by his everlasting carping at things English. Pollack would set himself to draw him out. Heaven alone can tell how near I came to murder. 53 days I had outward, cooped up with these two and a shy and profoundly depressed mate who read the Bible on Sundays and spent the rest of his leisure in lethargy. 53 days of life cooped up in a perpetual smell, in a persistent sick hunger that turned from the sight of food, in darkness, cold and wet, in a lightly ballasted ship that rolled and pitched and swayed. And all the time the sands in the hourglass of my uncle's fortunes were streaming out. Misery! Amidst it all I remember only one thing brightly. One morning of sunshine in the Bay of Biscay, and a vision of frothing waves, sapphire green, a bird following our wake, and our masts rolling about the sky. Then wind and rain closed in on us again. You must not imagine they were ordinary days. Days, I mean, of an average length. They were not so much days as long damp slabs of time that stretched each one to the horizon. And much of that length was night. One paraded the staggering deck in a borrowed sou'wester hour after hour in the chilly, windy, splashing and spitting darkness, or sat in the cabin, bored and ill, and looked at the faces of those inseparable companions by the help of a lamp that gave smell rather than light. Then one would see going up, 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 and then sinking down, 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 Pollack, extinct pipe in mouth, humorously observant, bringing his mind slowly to the 77th decision that the captain was a card, while the words flowed from the latter in a nimble incessant good. "Dis England, eet is not a country aristocratic. No, eet is a glorified bourgeoisie. Eet is plutocratic. In England dere is no aristocracy since de Wars of Roses. In the rest of Europe east of the Latins, yes. In England, no. Eet is all middle class. You're a England. Everything you look at, middle class. Respectable. Everything good. Eet is, you say, shocking. Madame Grundy, eet is all limited and computing and self-seeking. Dat is why your art is so limited. You're a fiction, you're philosophin, why you are also inartistic. You want nothing but profit. What will pay? What would you?" He had all those violent adjuncts to speech we Western Europeans have abandoned, shruggings of the shoulders, waving of the arms, thrusting out of the face, wonderful grimaces and twiddlings of the hands under your nose until you wanted to hit them away. Day after day it went on, and I had to keep any anger to myself, to reserve myself for the time ahead when it would be necessary to see the quap was got aboard and stowed. Knee deep in this man's astonishment, I knew he would make 1,000 objections to all we had before us. He talked like a drugged man. It ran glibly over his tongue. And all the time one could see his seamanship fretting him. He was gnawed by responsibility, perpetually uneasy about the ship's position, perpetually imagining dangers. If a sea hit us exceptionally hard, he'd be out of the cabin in an instant, making an outcry of inquiries. And he was pursued by a dread of the hold, of ballast shifting, of insidious wicked leaks. As we drew near the African coast, his fear of rocks and shoals became infectious. "I do not know dis coast," he used to say. "I come a hera because Gordon Nasmyth was coming too. Den he does not come." "Fortunes of war," I said, and tried to think in vain of any motive but sheer haphazard could have guided Gordon Nasmyth in the choice of these two men. I think perhaps Gordon Nasmyth had the artistic temperament and wanted contrasts, and also that the captain helped him to express his own malignant anti-Britishism. He was indeed an exceptionally inefficient captain. On the whole I was glad I had come even at the 11th hour to see to things. The captain, by the by, did at last, out of sheer nervousness, get aground at the end of Mordet's Island, but we got off in an hour or so with a swell and a little hard work in the boat. I suspected the mate of his opinion of the captain long before he expressed it. He was, I say, a taciturn man, but one day speech broke through him. He had been sitting at the table, with his arm folded on it, musing drearily, pipe in mouth, and the voice of the captain drifted down from above. The mate lifted his heavy eyes to me and regarded me for a moment. Then he began to heave with the beginnings of speech. He disembarrassed himself of his pipe. I cowered with expectation. Speech was coming at last. Before he spoke he nodded reassuringly once or twice. He moved his head strangely and mysteriously, but a child might have known he spoke of the captain. "'E's a foreigner." He regarded me doubtfully for a time, and at last decided for the sake of lucidity to clench the matter. "That's what 'e is. A Dago." He nodded like a man who gives a last tap to a nail, and I could see he considered his remark well and truly laid. His face, though still resolute, became as tranquil and uneventful as a huge hall after a public meeting has dispersed out of it, and finally he closed and locked it with his pipe. "Roumanian Jew, isn't he?" I said. He nodded darkly and almost forbiddingly. More would have been too much. The thing was said. But from that time forth I knew I could depend upon him and that he and I were friends. It happens I never did have to depend upon him, but that does not affect our relationship. Forward the crew lived lives very much after the fashion of ours, more crowded, more cramped and dirty, wetter, steamier, more verminous. The coarse food they had was still not so coarse but that they did not think they were living like fighting cocks. So far as I could make out, they were all nearly destitute men. Hardly any of them had a proper sea outfit, and what small possessions they had were a source of mutual distrust. And as we pitched and floundered southward, they gambled and fought, were brutal to one another, argued and wrangled loudly, until we protested at the uproar. There's no romance about the sea in a small sailing ship, as I saw it. The romance is in the mind of the landsman dreamer. These brigs and schooners and brigantines that still stand out from every little port are relics from an age of petty trade, as rotten and obsolescent as a Georgian house that has sunken into a slum. They are indeed just floating fragments of slum, much as icebergs are floating fragments of glacier. The civilized man who has learnt to wash, who has developed a sense of physical honour, of cleanly temperate feeding, of time, can endure them no more. They pass, and the clanking, coal-wasting steamers will follow them, giving place to cleaner, finer things. But so it was I made my voyage to Africa, and came at last into a world of steamy fogs and a hot smell of vegetable decay, and into sound and sight of surf and distant intermittent glimpses of the coast. I lived a strange concentrated life through all that time, such a life as a creature must do that has fallen in a well. All my former ways ceased, all my old vistas became memories. The situation I was saving was very small and distant now. I felt its urgency no more. Beatrice and Lady Grove, my uncle and the Hardingham, my soaring in the air, and my habitual wide vision of swift effectual things became as remote as if they were in some world I had left for ever. End of Book Third, Chapter Fourth, Parts 1 to 3. Recording by William Tomko. Book Third, Chapter Fourth, Parts 4 to 7 of Tono-Bungay. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by William Tomko. Tono-Bungay by H. G. Wells. Book Third, Chapter Fourth, Parts 4 to 7. 4. All these African memories stand by themselves. It was for me an expedition into the realms of undisciplined nature out of the world that is ruled by men. My first bout with that hot side of our mother that gives you the jungle, that cold side that gives you the air eddy, I was beginning to know passing well. They are memories woven upon a fabric of sunshine and heat and a constant warm smell of decay. They end in rain. Such rain as I had never seen before, a vehement, a frantic downpouring of water, but our first slow passage through the channels behind Mordet's Island was in incandescent sunshine. There we go in my memory still, a blistered dirty ship with patched sails and a battered mermaid to present Maud Mary, sounding and taking thought between high ranks of forest whose trees come out knee-deep at last in the water. There we go with a little breeze on our quarter. Mordet Island rounded, and the quap, it might be within a day of us. Here and there strange blossoms woke the dank intensities of green with a trumpet call of colour. Things crept among the jungle and peeped and dashed back rustling into stillness. Always in the sluggishly drifting, opaque waters were eddyings and stirrings. Little rushes of bubbles came chuckling up light-heartedly from this or that submerged conflict and tragedy. Now and again were crocodiles, like a stranded fleet of logs basking in the sun. Still, it was by day a dreary stillness broken only by insect sounds and the creaking and flapping of our progress, by the calling of the soundings and the captain's confused shouts. But in the night, as we lay moored to a clump of trees, the darkness brought a thousand swampy things to life, and out of the forest came screaming and howlings, screaming and yells that made us glad to be afloat. And once we saw between the tree stems long blazing fires. We passed 2 or 3 villages landward, and brown black women and children came and stared at us and gesticulated. And once a man came out in a boat from a creek and hailed us in an unknown tongue. And so at last we came to a great open place, a broad lake rimmed with a desolation of mud and bleached refuse and dead trees, free from crocodiles or water birds or sight or sound of any living thing, and saw far off, even as Nasmyth had described, the ruins of the deserted station, and hard by two little leaps of buff-hued rubbish under a great rib of rock, the quap. The forest receded. The land to the right of us fell away and became barren, and far on across notch in its backbone was surf and the sea. We took the ship in towards those heaps and the ruined jetty slowly and carefully. The captain came and talked. "This is eet?" he said. "Yes," said I. "Is eet for trade we have come?" This was ironical. "No," said I. "Gordon Nasmyth would have told me long ago what it ees for we have come." "I'll tell you now," I said. "We are going to lay in as close as we can to those two heaps of stuff. You see them? Under the rock. Then we are going to chuck all our ballast overboard and take those in. Then we're going home." "May I presume to ask, is eet gold?" "No," I said incivilly, "it isn't." "Then what is it?" "It's stuff. Of some commercial value." "We can't do eet," he said. "We can," I answered reassuringly. "We can't," he said as confidently. "I don't mean what you mean. You know so leetle. But dis is forbidden country." I turned on him suddenly angry, and met bright excited eyes. For a minute we scrutinised one another. Then I said, "That's our risk. Trade is forbidden. But this isn't trade. This thing's got to be done." His eyes glittered and he shook his head. The brig stood in slowly through the twilight toward the strange, scorched and blistered stretch of beach, and the man at the wheel strained his ears to listening the low-voiced angry argument that began between myself and the captain, that was presently joined by Pollack. We moored at last within 100 yards of our goal, and all through our dinner and fair into the night we argued intermittently and fiercely with the captain about our right to load just what we pleased. "I will haf nothing to do with eet," he persisted. "I wash my hands." It seemed that night as though we argued in vain. "If it is not trade," he said, "it is prospecting and mining. That is worse. Anyone who knows anything, outside England, knows that is worse." We argued, and I lost my temper and swore at him. Pollack kept cooler and chewed his pipe watchfully with that blue eye of his upon the captain's gestures. Finally I went on deck to cool. The sky was overcast. I discovered all the men were in a knot forward, staring at the faint quivering luminosity that had spread over the heaps of quap, a phosphorescence such as one sees at times on rotting wood. And about the beach east and west there were patches and streaks of something like diluted moonshine. In the small hours I was still awake and turning over scheme after scheme in my mind whereby I might circumvent the captain's opposition. I meant to get that quap aboard if I had to kill some one to do it. Never in my life had I been so thwarted. After this intolerable voyage! There came a rap at my cabin door, and then it opened and I made out a bearded face. "Come in," I said, and a black voluble figure I could just see obscurely came in to talk in my private ear and fill my cabin with its whisperings and gestures. It was the captain. He too had been awake and thinking things over. He had come to explain enormously. I lay there hating him and wondering if I and Pollack could lock him in his cabin and run the ship without him. "I do not want to spoil dis expedition," emerged from a cloud of protestations, and then I was able to disentangle "a commission. Shush a small commission. For special risks." Special risks became frequent. I let him explain himself out. It appeared he was also demanding an apology for something I had said. No doubt I had insulted him generously. At last came definite offers. I broke my silence and bargained. "Pollack!" I cried, and hammered the partition. "What's up?" asked Pollack. I stated the case concisely. There came a silence. "He's a card," said Pollack. "Let's give him his commission. I don't mind." "Eh?" I cried. "I said he was a card, that's all," said Pollack. "I'm coming." He appeared in my doorway, a faint white figure joined our vehement whisperings. We had to buy the captain off. We had to promise him 10% of our problematical profits. We were to give him 10% on what we sold the cargo for, over and above his legitimate pay, and I found in my out-bargained and disordered state small consolation in the thought that I, as the Gordon Nasmyth expedition, was to sell the stuff to myself as business organisations. And he further exasperated me by insisting on having our bargain in writing. In the form of a letter, he insisted. "All right," I acquiesced, "in the form of a letter. Here goes. Get a light." "And the apology," he said, folding up the letter. "All right," I said. "Apology." My hand shook with anger as I wrote, and afterwards I could not sleep for hate of him. At last I got up. I suffered, I found, from an unusual clumsiness. I struck my foot against the cabin door, and cut myself as I shaved. I found myself at last pacing the deck under the dawn in a mood of extreme exasperation. The sun rose abruptly and splashed light blindingly into my eyes, and I swore at the sun. I found myself imagining fresh obstacles with the men and talking aloud in anticipatory rehearsal of the consequent row. The malaria of the quap was already in my blood. 5. Sooner or later the ridiculous embargo that now lies upon all the coast eastward of Mordet Island will be lifted and the reality of the deposits of quap ascertained. I am sure that we were merely taking the outcrop of a stratum of nodulated deposits that dip steeply seaward. Those heaps were merely the crumbled out contents of two irregular cavities in the rock. They are as natural as any talus or heap of that kind, and the mud along the edge of the water for miles is mixed with quap, and is radioactive and lifeless and faintly phosphorescent at night. But the reader will find the full particulars of my impression of all this in the Geological Magazine for October 1905, and to that I must refer him. There, too, he will find my unconfirmed theories of its nature. If I am right, it is something far more significant from the scientific point of view than those incidental constituents of various rare metals, pitchblende, rutile, and the like, upon which the revolutionary discoveries of the last decade are based. Those are just little molecular centres of disintegration, of that mysterious decay and rotting of those elements, elements once regarded as the most stable things in nature. But there is something, the only word that comes near it is cancerous, and that is not very near, about the whole of quap, something that creeps and lives as a disease lives by destroying an elemental stirring and disarrangement, incalculably maleficent and strange. This is no imaginative comparison of mine. To my mind radio activity is a real disease of matter. Moreover, it is a contagious disease. It spreads. You bring those debased and crumbling atoms near others, and those too presently catch the trick of swinging themselves out of coherent existence. It is in matter exactly what the decay of our old culture is in society, a loss of traditions and distinctions and assured reactions. When I think of these inexplicable dissolvent centres that have come into being in our globe, these quap heaps are surely by far the largest that have yet been found in the world, the rest as yet mere specks in grains and crystals. I am haunted by a grotesque fancy of the ultimate eating away and dry rotting and dispersal of all our world, so that while man still struggles and dreams his very substance will change and crumble from beneath him. I mention this here as a queer persistent fancy. Suppose, indeed, that is to be the end of our planet. No splendid climax and finale, no towering accumulation of achievements, but just atomic decay. I add that to the ideas of the suffocating comet, the dark body out of space, the burning out of the sun, the distorted orbit, as a new and far more possible end, as science can see ends, to this strange byplay of matter that we call human life. I do not believe this can be the end, No human soul can believe in such an end and go on living. But to it science points as a possible thing, science and reason alike. If single human beings, if one singly rickety infant, can be born as it were by accident and die futile, why not the whole race? These are questions I have never answered, that now I never attempt to answer, but the thought of Quap and its mysteries brings them back to me. I can witness that the beach and mud for 2 miles or more either way was a lifeless beach, lifeless as I could have imagined no tropical mud could ever be, and all the dead branches and leaves and rotting dead fish and so forth that drifted ashore became persistently shriveled and white. Sometimes crocodiles would come up out of the water and bask, and now and then water birds would explore the mud and rocky ribs that rose out of it, in a mood of transitory speculation. That was its utmost admiration, and the air felt at once hot and austere, dry and blistering, and altogether different the warm moist embrace that had met us at our first African landfall and to which we had grown accustomed. I believe that the primary influence of the quap upon us was to increase the conductivity of our nerves, and that is a mere unjustifiable speculation on my part. At any rate, it gave a sort of east wind effect to life. We all became irritable, clumsy, languid, and disposed to be impatient with our languor. We moored the brig to the rocks with difficulty, and got aground on mud and decided to stick there and tow off when we had done. The bottom was as greasy as butter. Our efforts to fix up planks and sleepers in order to wheel the quap aboard were as ill-conceived as that sort of work can be, and that sort of work can at times be very ill-conceived. The captain had a superstitious fear of his hold. He became wildly gesticulatory and expository and incompetent at the bare thought of it. His shouts still echo in my memory, becoming as each crisis approached less and less like any known tongue. But I cannot now write the history of those days of blundering and toil, of how Milton, one of the boys, fell from a plank to the beach, 30 feet perhaps, with his barrow and broke his arm and I believe a rib, of how I and Pollock set the limb and nursed him through the fever that followed, of how one man after another succumbed to a feverish malaria, and how I, by nature of my scientific reputation, was obliged to play the part of doctor and dose them with quinine, and then finding that worse than nothing, with rum and small doses of Easton syrup, of which there chanced to be a case of bottles aboard. Heaven and Gordon Nasmyth know why. For 3 long days we lay in misery and never shipped a barrow load. Then, when they resumed, the men's hands broke out into sores. There were no gloves available, and I tried to get them, while they shovelled and wheeled, to cover their hands with stockings or greased rags. They would not do this on account of the heat and discomfort. This attempt of mine did, however, direct their attention to the quap as the source of their illness, and precipitated what in the end finished our lading, an informal strike. "We've had enough of this," they said, and they meant it. They came aft to say as much. They cowed the captain. Through all these days the weather was variously vile. First a furnace heat under a sky of scowling intensity of blue, then a hot fog that stuck in one's throat like wool and turned the men on the planks into colourless figures of giants, then a wild burst of thunderstorms, mad elemental uproar and rain. Through it all, against illness, heat, confusion of mind, one master impetus prevailed with me, to keep the shipping going, to maintain one motive at least, whatever else arose or ceased, the chuff of the spades, the squeaking and shriek of the barrows, the pluppa, pluppa, pluppa as the men came trotting along the swinging high planks, and then at last the dollop, dollop as the stuff shot into the hold. Another barrow load, thank God! Another 1,500, or it may be 2,000 pounds, for the saving of Ponderevo. I found out many things about myself and humanity in those weeks of effort behind Mordet Island. I understand now the heart of the sweater, of the harsh employer, of the nigger driver. I had brought these men into a danger they didn't understand. I was fiercely resolved to overcome their opposition and bend and use them for my purpose. And I hated the men. But I hated all humanity during the time that the quap was near me. But my mind was pervaded, too, by a sense of urgency, and by the fear that we should be discovered and our proceedings stopped. I wanted to get out to sea again, to be beating up northward with our plunder. I was afraid our masts showed to seaward and might betray us to some curious passer on the high sea. And one evening, near the end, I saw a canoe with 3 natives far off down the lake. I got field glasses from the captain and scrutinized them, and I could see them staring at us. One man might have been a half-breed and was dressed in white. They watched us for some time very quietly and then paddled off into some channel in the forest shadows. And for 3 nights running, so that it took a painful grip upon my inflamed imagination, I dreamt of my uncle's face, only that it was ghastly white like a clown's, and the throat was cut from ear to ear. A long ochreous cut. "Too late," he said. "Too late." 6. A day or so after we had got to work upon the quap, I found myself so sleepless and miserable that the ship became unendurable. Just before the rush of sunrise I borrowed Pollack's gun, walked down the planks, clambered over the quap heaps, and prowled along the beach. I went perhaps a mile and a half that day, and some distance beyond the ruins of the old station. I became interested in the desolation about me, and found when I returned that I was able to sleep for nearly an hour. It was delightful to have been alone for so long. No captain, no Pollack, no one. Accordingly, I repeated this expedition the next morning and the next until it became a custom with me. There was little for me to do once the digging and wheeling was organized, and so these prowlings of mine grew longer and longer, and presently I began to take food with me. I pushed these walks far beyond the area desolated by the quap. On the edges of that was first a zone of stunted vegetation, then a sort of swampy jungle that was difficult to penetrate, and then the beginnings of the forest, a scene of huge tree stems and tangled creeper ropes and roots mingled with oozy mud. Here I used to loaf in a state between botanizing and reverie, always very anxious to know what was up above in the sunlight. And here it was, I murdered a man. It was the most unmeaning and purposeless murder imaginable. Even as I write down its well-remembered particulars, there comes again the sense of its strangeness, its pointlessness, its incompatibility with any of the neat and definite theories people hold about life and the meaning of the world. I did this thing, and I want to tell of my doing it, but why I did it, and particularly why I should be held responsible for it, I cannot explain. That morning I had come upon a track in the forest, and it had occurred to me as a disagreeable idea that this was a human pathway. I didn't want to come upon any human beings. The less our expedition saw of the African population, the better for its prospects. Thus far we had been singularly free from native pestering. So I turned back, and was making my way over mud and roots and dead fronds and petals scattered from the green world above, when abruptly I saw my victim. I became aware of him perhaps 40 feet off, standing quite still and regarding me. He wasn't by any means a pretty figure. He was very black and naked except for a dirty loincloth. His legs were ill-shaped and his toes spread wide, and the upper edge of his cloth and a girdle of string cut his clumsy abdomen into folds. His forehead was low, his nose very flat, and his lower lip swollen and purplish red. His hair was short and fuzzy, and about his neck was a string and a little purse of skin. He carried a musket, and a powder flask was stuck in his girdle. It was a curious confrontation. There opposed to him stood I, a little soiled perhaps, but still a rather elaborately civilized human being, born, bred, and trained in a vague tradition. In my hand was an unaccustomed gun. And each of us was essentially a teeming, vivid brain, tensely excited by the encounter, quite unaware of the other's mental content or what to do with him. He stepped back a pace or so, stumbled and turned to run. "Stop!" I cried. "Stop, you fool!" and started to run after him, shouting such things in English, but I was no match for him over the roots and mud. I had a preposterous idea. He mustn't get away and tell them. And with that instantly I brought both feet together, raised my gun, aimed quite coolly, drew the trigger carefully and shot him neatly in the back. I saw, and saw with a leap of pure exultation, the smash of my bullet between his shoulder blades. "Got him!" said I, dropping my gun, and down he flopped and died without a groan. "By Jove!" I cried with note of surprise. "I've killed him!" I looked about me and then went forward cautiously, in a mood between curiosity and astonishment, to look at this man whose soul I had flung so unceremoniously out of our common world. I went to him, not as one goes to something one has made or done, but as one approaches something found. He was frightfully smashed out in front. He must have died in the instant. I stooped and raised him by his shoulder and realised that. I dropped him, and stood about and peered about me through the trees. "My word!" I said. He was the second dead human being, apart I mean from surgical properties and mummies and common shows of that sort, that I have ever seen. I stood over him wondering beyond measure. A practical idea came into that confusion. Had any one heard the gun? I reloaded. After a time I felt securer and gave my mind again to the dead I had killed. What must I do? It occurred to me that perhaps I ought to bury him. At any rate, I ought to hide him. I reflected coolly, and then put my gun within easy reach and dragged him by the arm towards a place where the mud seemed soft, and thrust him in. His powder flask slipped from his loin cloth, and I went back to get it. Then I pressed him down with the butt of my rifle. Afterwards this all seemed to me most horrible, but at the time it was entirely a matter-of-fact transaction. I looked round for any other visible evidence of his fate, looked round as one does when one packs one's portmanteau in an hotel bedroom. When I got my bearings and carefully returned towards the ship, I had the mood of grave concentration of a boy who has lapsed into poaching. And the business only began to assume proper proportions for me as I got near the ship, to seem any other kind of thing than the killing of a bird or rabbit. In the night, however, it took on enormous and portentous forms. "By God!" I cried suddenly, starting wide awake. But it was murder! I lay after that wide awake, staring at my memories. In some odd way these visions mixed up with my dream in my uncle in his despair. The black body which I saw now damaged and partly buried, but which, nevertheless, I no longer felt was dead, but acutely alive and perceiving. I mixed up with the ochreous slash under my uncle's face. I tried to dismiss this horrible obsession from my mind, but it prevailed over all my efforts. The next day was utterly black with my sense of that ugly creature's body. I am the least superstitious of men, but it drew me. It drew me back into those thickets, to the very place where I had hidden him. Some evil and detestable beast had been at him, and he lay disinterred. Methodically I buried his swollen and mangled carcass again and returned to the ship for another night of dreams. Next day for all the morning I resisted the impulse to go to him, and played nap with Pollack with my secret gnawing at me, and in the evening started to go and was never benighted. I never told a soul of them of this thing I had done. Next day I went early, and he had gone, and there were human footmarks and ugly stains round the muddy hole from which he had been dragged. I returned to the ship, disconcerted and perplexed. That day it was the men came aft, with blistered hands and faces and sullen eyes. When they proclaimed through Edwards, their spokesman, "We've had enough of this, and we mean it," I answered very readily, "So have I. Let's go." 7. We were none too soon. People had been reconnoitring us, the telegraph had been at work, and we were not 4 hours at sea before we ran against the gunboat that had been sent down the coast to look for us, and that would have caught us behind the island like a beast in a trap. It was a night of driving cloud that gave intermittent gleams of moonlight. The wind and sea were strong, and we were rolling along through a drift of rails and mist. Suddenly the world was white with moonshine. The gunboat came out as a long dark shape wallowing on the water to the east. She sighted the Maud Mary at once, and fired some sort of pop gun to arrest us. The mate turned to me. "Shall I tell the captain?" "The captain be damned," said I, and we let him sleep through 2 hours of chase till a rainstorm swallowed us up. Then we changed our course and sailed right across them, and by morning only her smoke was showing. We were clear of Africa, and with the booty aboard I did not see what stood between us and home. For the first time since I had fallen sick in the Thames my spirits rose. I was sea-sick and physically disgusted, of course, but I felt kindly in spite of my qualms. So far as I could calculate, then the situation was saved. I saw myself returning triumphantly into the Thames, and nothing on earth to prevent old Captain's perfect filament going on the market in a fortnight. I had the monopoly of electric lamps beneath my feet. I was released from the spell of that blood-stained black body all mixed up with grey-black mud. I was going back to baths and decent food and aeronautics and Beatrice. I was going back to Beatrice and my real life again, out of this well into which I had fallen. It would have needed something more than sea-sickness and quap fever to prevent my spirits rising. I told the captain that I agreed with him that the British were the scum of Europe, the westward drift of all the people, a disgusting rabble, and I lost £3 by attenuating retail to Pollock at Halfpenny Nap and Euchre. And then, you know, as we got out into the Atlantic this side of Cape Verde, the ship began to go to pieces. I don't pretend for one moment to understand what happened, but I think Gyllenhaagen's recent work on the efforts of radium upon ligneous tissue does rather carry out my idea that emanations from quap have rapid rotting effect upon woody fibre. From the first there had been a different feel about the ship, and as the big winds and waves began to strain her she commenced leaking. Soon she was leaking, not at any particular point, but everywhere. She did not spring a leak, I mean, but water came in first of all near the decaying edges of her planks, and then through them. I firmly believe the water came through the wood. First it began to ooze, then to trickle. It was like trying to carry moist sugar in a thin paper bag. Soon we were taking in water as though we had opened a door in her bottom. Once it began, the thing went ahead beyond all fighting. For a day or so we did our best, and I can still remember in my limbs and back the pumping, the fatigue in my arms, and the memory of a clear little dribble of water that jerked as one pumped, and of knocking off, and the being awakened to go on again, and of fatigue piling upon fatigue. At last we ceased to think of anything but pumping. One became a thing of torment enchanted, doomed to pump for ever. I still remember it as pure relief when at last Pollock came to me, pipe in mouth. "The captain says the damn thing's going to go down right now," he remarked, chewing his mouthpiece. "Eh?" "Good idea," I said. "One can't go on pumping for ever." And without hurry or alacrity, sullenly and wearily we got into the boats and pulled away from the Maud Mary until we were clear of her. And then we stayed resting on our oars, motionless upon a glassy sea, waiting for her to sink. We were all silent, even the captain was silent until she went down, and then he spoke quite mildly in an undertone. "Dat is the first ship I have ever lost, and it was not a fair game. It was not a cargo any man should take. No." I stared at the slow eddies that circled above the departed Maud Mary, and the last chance of business organizations. I felt weary beyond emotion. I thought of my heroics to Beatrice and my uncle, of my prompt "I'll go," and of all the ineffectual months I had spent after the headlong decision. I was moved to laughter at myself and fate. But the captain and the men did not laugh. The men scowled at me and rubbed their sore and blistered hands and set themselves to row. As all the world knows, we were picked up by the Union Castle liner, Portland Castle. The hairdresser aboard was a wonderful man, and he even improvised me a dress suit, and produced a clean shirt and warm underclothing. I had a hot bath and dressed and dined and drank a bottle of Burgundy. "Now," I said, "are there any newspapers? I want to know what's been happening in the world." My steward gave me what he had, but I landed at Plymouth still largely ignorant of the course of events. I shook off Pollock, and left the captain and mate in an hotel and the men in a sailors' home until I could send to pay them off, and I made my way to the station. The newspapers I bought, the placards I saw, all England indeed, resounded to my uncle's bankruptcy. End of Book Third, Chapter Fourth, Parts 4 to 7. Recording by William Tomko. Book Fourth, Chapter First, Parts 1 to 3 of Tono-Bungay. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by William Tomko. Tono-Bungay by H. G. Wells. Book Fourth, Chapter First, Parts 1 to 3. Book the Fourth, The Aftermath of Tono-Bungay. Chapter the First, The Stick of the Rocket. 1. That evening I talked with my uncle in the Hardingham for the last time. The atmosphere of the place had altered quite shockingly. Instead of the crowd of importunate courtiers, there were just half a dozen uninviting men, journalists waiting for an interview. Roper, the big commissionaire, was still there, but now indeed he was defending my uncle from something more than time-wasting intrusions. I found the little man alone in the inner office pretending to work, but really brooding. He was looking yellow and deflated. "Lord," he said at the sight of me, "you're lean, George. It makes that scar of yours show up." We regarded each other gravely for a time. "Quap," I said, "is at the bottom of the Atlantic. There's some bills. We've got to pay the men." "Seen the papers?" "Read 'em all in the train." "At bay," he said. "I been at bay for a week, yelping round me, and me facing the music. I'm feelin' a bit tired." He blew and wiped his glasses. "My stomach isn't what it was," he explained. "One finds it, these times. How did it all happen, George? Your Marconigram, it took me in the wind a bit." I told him concisely. He nodded to the paragraphs of my narrative, and at the end he poured something from a medicine bottle into a sticky little wine-glass, and drank it. I became aware of the presence of drugs, of 3 or 4 small bottles before him among his disorder of papers, of a faint, elusively familiar odour in the room. "Yes," he said, wiping his lips and recorking the bottle. "You've done your best, George. The luck's been against us." He reflected, bottle in hand. "Sometimes the luck goes with you and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it doesn't. And then where are you? Grass in the oven. Fight or no fight?" He asked a few questions, and then his thoughts came back to his own urgent affairs. I tried to get some comprehensive account of the situation from him, but he would not give it. "Oh, I wish I'd had you. I wish I'd had you, George. I've had a lot on my hands. You're clear-headed at times." "What has happened?" "Oh, boom. Infernal things." "Yes, but how? I'm just off the sea, remember." "It'd worry me too much to tell you now. It's tied up in a skein." He muttered something to himself and mused darkly and roused himself to say, "Besides, you'd better keep out of it. It's getting tight. Get him talking. Go down to Crest Hill and fly. That's your affair." For a time his manner set free queer anxieties in my brain again. I will confess that that Mordet Island nightmare of mine returned, and as I looked at him his hand went out for the drug again. "Stomach, George," he said. "I been fightin' on that. Every man fights on something. Gives way somewheres. Head, heart, liver. Something gives way somewhere. Napoleon did at last. All through the Waterloo campaign. His stomach. It wasn't a stomach. Worse than mine, no end." The mood of depression passed as the drug worked within him. His eyes brightened. He began to talk big. He began to dress up the situation for my eyes, to recover what he had admitted to me. He put it as a retreat from Russia. There were still the chances of Leipzig. "It's a battle, George. A big fight. We're fighting for millions. I've still chances. There's still a card or so. I can't tell all my plans, like speaking on the stroke." "You might," I began. "I can't, George. It's like asking to look at some embryo. You got to wait. I know. In a sort of way. I know. But to tell it? No. You been away so long, and everything's got complicated." My perception of disastrous entanglements deepened with the rise of his spirits. It was evident that I could only help to tie him up in whatever net was weaving round his mind by forcing questions and explanations upon him. My thoughts flew off at another angle. "How's Aunt Susan?" said I. I had to repeat the question. His busy whispering lips stopped for a moment, and he answered in the note of one who repeats a formula. "She'd like to be in the battle with me. She'd like to be here in London. But there's corners I got to turn alone." His eye rested for a moment on the little bottle beside him. "And things have happened." "You might go down now and talk to her," he said in a directer voice. "I shall be down to-morrow night, I think." He looked up as though he hoped that would end our talk. "For the week-end?" I asked. "For the week-end. Thank God for week-ends, George." 2. My return home to Lady Grove was a very different thing from what I had anticipated when I had got out to sea with my load of quap and fancied the perfect filament was safe within my grasp. As I walked through the evening light along the downs, the summer stillness seemed like the stillness of something newly dead. There were no lurking workmen any more, no cyclists on the high road. Cessation was manifest everywhere. There had been, I learnt from my aunt, a touching and quite voluntary demonstration when the Crest Hill work had come to an end and the men had drawn their last pay. They had cheered my uncle and hooted the contractors and Lord Boom. I cannot now recall the manner in which my aunt and I greeted one another. I must have been very tired there, but whatever impression was made has gone out of my memory. But I recall very clearly how we sat at the little round table near the big window that gave on the terrace, and dined and talked. I remember her talking of my uncle. She asked after him and whether he seemed well. "I wish I could help," she said, "but I've never helped him much. Never. His way of doing things was never mine. And since he began to get so rich, he'd kept things from me. In the old days it was different. There he is. I don't know what he's doing. He won't have me near him. More's kept from me than anyone. The very servants won't let me know. They try and stop the worst of the papers, Boom's things, from coming upstairs. I suppose they've got him in a corner, George. Poor old Teddy. Poor old Adam and Eve we are. Official receivers with flaming swords to drive us out of our garden. I'd hoped we'd never have another trek. Well, anyway, it won't be Crest Hill. But it's hard on Teddy. He must be in such a mess up there. Poor old chap. I suppose we can't help him. I suppose we'd only worry him. Have some more soup, George, while there is some?" The next day was one of those days of strong perception that stand out clear in one's memory when the common course of days is blurred. I can recall now the awakening in the large familiar room that was always kept for me, and how I lay staring at its chintz-covered chairs, its spaced fine furniture, its glimpse of the cedars without, and thought that all this had to end. I have never been greedy for money. I have never wanted to be rich, but I felt now an immense sense of impending deprivation. I read the newspapers after breakfast, I and my aunt together, and then I walked up to see what Cothope had done in the matter of Lord Roberts B. Never before had I appreciated so acutely the ample brightness of the Lady Grove gardens, the dignity and wide peace of all about me. It was one of those warm mornings in late May that have won all the glory of summer without losing the gay delicacy of spring. The shrubbery was bright with laburnum and lilac. The beds swarmed with daffodils and narcissi, and with lilies of the valley in the shade. I went along the well-kept paths among the rhododendra and through the private gate into the woods where the bluebells and common orchid were in profusion. Never before had I tasted so completely the fine sense of privilege and ownership. And all this has to end, I told myself. All this has to end. Neither my uncle nor I had made any provision for disaster. All we had was in the game, and I had little doubt now of the completeness of our ruin. For the first time in my life since he had sent me that wonderful telegram of his, I had to consider that common anxiety of mankind, employment. I had to come off my magic carpet and walk once more in the world. And suddenly I found myself at the cross drives where I had seen Beatrice for the first time after so many years. It is strange, but so far as I can recollect, I had not thought of her once since I had landed at Plymouth. No doubt she had filled the background of my mind, but I do not remember one definite, clear thought. I had been intent on my uncle and the financial collapse. It came like a blow in the face now. All that, too, had to end. Suddenly I was filled with the thought of her and a great longing for her. What would she do when she realized our immense disaster? What would she do? How would she take it? It filled me with astonishment to realize how little I could tell. Should I perhaps presently happen upon her? I went on through the plantations and out upon the downs, and thence I saw Cothope with a new glider of his own design soaring downwind to my old familiar grounding place. To judge by its long rhythm it was a very good glider. Like Cothope's cheek, thought I, to go on with the research. I wonder if he's keeping notes, but all this will have to stop. He was sincerely glad to see me. "It's been a rum go," he said. He had been there without wages for a month, a man forgotten in the rush of events. "I just stuck on and did what I could with the stuff. I got a bit of money of my own, and I said to myself, well, here you are with the gear and no one to look after you. You won't get such a chance again, my boy, not in all your born days. Why not make what you can with it? How's Lord Roberts B?" Cothope lifted his eyebrows. "I've had to refrain," he said, "but he's looking very handsome." "Gods!" I said. "I'd like to get him up just once before we smash. You read the papers? You know we're going to smash." "Oh, I read the papers. It's scandalous, sir. Such work as ours should depend on things like that. You and I ought to be under the State, sir, if you'll excuse me." "Nothing to excuse," I said. "I've always been a socialist, of a sort, in theory. Let's go and have a look at him. How is he? Deflated?" "Just about quarter full. That last oil glaze of yours holds the gas something beautiful. He's not lost a cubic metre a week." Cothope returned to socialism as we went toward the sheds. "Glad to think you're a socialist, sir," he said. "It's the only civilised state. I've been a socialist some years. Off the Clarion. It's a rotten scramble, this world. It takes the things we make and invent and it plays the silly fool with them. We scientific people will have to take things over and stop all this financing and advertisement and that. It's too silly. It's a nuisance. Look at us." Lord Roberts-by, even in his partially deflated condition in his shed, was a fine thing to stare up at. I stood side by side with Cothope, regarding him, and it was borne in upon me, more acutely than ever, that all this had to end. I had a feeling just like the feeling of a boy who wants to do wrong, that I would use up the stuff while I had it before the creditors descended. I had a queer fancy too, I remember, that if I could get into the air it would advertise my return to Beatrice. "We'll fill her," I said concisely. "It's all ready," said Cothope, and added as an afterthought, "unless they cut off the gas." I worked and interested myself with Cothope all the morning and for a time forgot my other troubles. But the thought of Beatrice flooded me slowly and steadily. It became an unintelligent sick longing to see her. I felt that I could not wait for the filling of Lord Roberts-by, that I must hunt her up and see her soon. I got everything forward and lunched with Cothope, and then, with the feeblest excuses, left him in order to prowl down through the woods toward Bedley Corner. I became a prey to wretched hesitations and diffidence. Ought I to go near her now? I asked myself, reviewing all the social abasements of my early years. At last, about 5, I called at the Dower House. I was greeted by their Charlotte, with a forbidding eye and a cold astonishment. Both Beatrice and Lady Osprey were out. There came into my head some prowling dream of meeting her. I went along the lane towards Woking, the lane down which we had walked 5 months ago in the wind and rain. I mooned for a time in our former footsteps, then swore and turned back across the fields, and then conceived a distaste for Cothope and went downward. At last I found myself looking down on the huge abandoned masses of the Crest Hill house. That gave my mind a twist into a new channel. My uncle came uppermost again. What a strange, melancholy emptiness of intention that stricken enterprise seemed in the even evening sunlight! What vulgar magnificence and crudity and utter absurdity! It was as idiotic as the Pyramids. I sat down on the stile, staring at it as though I had never seen that forest of scaffold poles, that waste of walls and bricks and plaster and shaped stones, that wilderness of broken soil and wheeling tracks and dumps before. It struck me suddenly as the compactest image and sample of all that passes for progress, of all the advertisement-inflated spending, the aimless building up and pulling down, the enterprise and promise of my age. This was our fruit, this was what he had done, I and my uncle, in the fashion of our time. We were its leaders and exponents, we were the thing it most flourishingly produced. For this futility in its end, for an epoch of such futility, the solemn scroll of history had unfolded. "Great God!" I cried. "But is this life?" For this the armies drilled, for this the law was administered and the prisons did their duty, for this the millions toiled and perished in suffering, in order that a few of us should build palaces we never finished, make billiard rooms under ponds, run imbecile walls round irrational estates, scorch about the world in motor cars, devise flying machines, play golf and a dozen such foolish games of ball, crowd into chattering dinner parties, gamble and make our lives one vast dismal spectacle of witless waste. So it struck me then, and for a time I could think of no other interpretation. This was life. It came to me like a revelation at once incredible and indisputable of the abysmal folly of our being. 3. I was roused from such thoughts by the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned half hopeful, so foolish is a lover's imagination, and stopped amazed. It was my uncle. His face was white, white as I had seen it in my dream. "Hullo!" I said, and stared. "Why aren't you in London?" "It's all up," he said. "Adjudicated?" "No." I stared at him for a moment and then got off the stile. We stood swaying, and then came forward with a weak motion of his arms, like a man who cannot see distinctly, and caught at and leant upon the stile. For a moment we were absolutely still. He made a clumsy gesture towards the great futility below, and choked. I discovered that his face was wet with tears, that his wet glasses blinded him. He put up his little fat hand and clawed them off clumsily, felt inefficiently for his pocket handkerchief, and then, to my horror, as he clung to me, he began to weep aloud, this little old world-worn swindler. It wasn't just sobbing or shedding tears, it was crying as a child cries. It was, oh, terrible. "It's cruel," he blubbered at last. "They asked me questions. They kep' asking me questions, George." He sought for utterance and spluttered. "The bloody bullies!" he shouted. "The bloody bullies!" He ceased to weep. He became suddenly rapid and explanatory. "It's not a fair game, George. They tire you out. And I'm not well. My stomach's all wrong. And I been and got a cold. I always been liable to cold, and this one's on my chest. And then they tell you to speak up. They bait you, and bait you, and bait you. It's torture. The strain of it. You can't remember what you said. You're bound to contradict yourself. It's like Russia, George. It isn't fair play. Prominent man. I've been next at dinners with that chap, Neil. I've told him stories. And he's bitter. Sets out to ruin me. Don't ask a civil question. Bellows." He broke down again. "I've been bellowed at. I've been bullied. I've been treated like a dog. Dirty cads they are. Dirty cads. I'd rather be a three-card sharper than a barrister. I'd rather sell cat's meat in the streets. They spring things on me this morning, things I didn't expect. They rushed me. I'd got it all in my hands, and then I was jumped by Neil. Neil I've given city tips to. Neil I've helped Neil. I couldn't swallow a mouthful, not in the lunch hour. I couldn't face it. It's true, George, I couldn't face it. I said I'd get a bit of air and slipped out and down to the Embankment, and there I took a boat to Richmond. Some idea. I took a rowing boat when I got there, and I rowed about on the river for a bit. A lot of chaps and girls there was on the bank laughing at my shirt sleeves and top hat. Dessay they thought it was a pleasure trip. Fat lot of pleasure. I rowed round for a bit and came in. Then I came on here, Windsor way. And there they are in London doing what they like with me. I don't care." "But," I said, looking down at him, perplexed. "It's abscondin'. They'll have a warrant." "I don't understand," I said. "It's all up, George, all up and over." And I thought I'd live in that place, George, and die a lord. It's a great place, really, an imperial, if anyone has the sense to buy it and finish it. That terrace—" I stood thinking him over. "Look here," I said, "what's that about a warrant? Are you sure they'll get a warrant? I'm sorry, uncle, but what have you done?" "Haven't I told you?" "Yes, but they won't do very much to you for that. They'll only bring you up for the rest of your examination." He remained silent for a time. At last he spoke, speaking with difficulty. "It's worse than that. I've done something. They're bound to get it out. Practically they have got it out." "What?" "Writin' things down. I done something." For the first time in his life, I believe, he felt and looked ashamed. It filled me with remorse to see him suffer so. "We've all done things," I said. "It's part of the game the world makes us play. If they want to arrest you, and you've got no cards in your hand, they mustn't arrest you." "No, that's partly why I went to Richmond. But I never thought—" His little bloodshot eyes stared at Crest Hill. "That chap Whittaker Wright," he said. "He had his stuff ready. I haven't. Now you got it, George. That's the sort of hole I'm in." End of Book Fourth, Chapter First, Parts 1 to 3. Recording by William Tomko. Book Fourth, Chapter First, Parts 4 to 6 of Tono-Bungay. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by William Tomko. Tono-Bungay by H. G. Wells, Book Fourth, Chapter First, Parts 4 to 6. 4. That memory of my uncle at the gate is very clear and full. I am able to recall even the undertow of my thoughts while he was speaking. I remember my pity and affection for him in his misery growing and stirring within me, my realization that at any risk I must help him. But then comes indistinctness again. I was beginning to act. I know I persuaded him to put himself in my hands, and began at once to plan and do. I think that when we act most we remember least, that just in the measure that the impulse of our impressions translates itself into schemes and movements, it ceases to record itself in memories. I know I resolved to get him away at once, and to use the Lord Roberts bee in effecting that. It was clear he was soon to be a hunted man, and it seemed to me already unsafe for him to try the ordinary continental routes in his flight. I had to evolve some scheme, and evolve it rapidly, how we might drop most inconspicuously into the world across the water. My resolve to have one flight at least in my airship fitted with this like hand to glove. It seemed to me we might be able to cross over the water in the night, set our airship adrift, and turn up as pedestrian tourists in Normandy or Brittany, and so get away. That, at any rate, was my ruling idea. I sent off Cothope with a dummy note to Woking, because I did not want to implicate him, and took my uncle to the pavilion. I went down to my aunt and made a clean breast of the situation. She became admirably competent. We went into his dressing-room and ruthlessly broke his locks. I got a pair of brown boots, a tweed suit and a cap of his, and indeed a plausible walking outfit, and a little game bag for his pedestrian gear, and in addition a big motoring overcoat and a supply of rugs to add to those I had at the pavilion. I also got a flask of brandy, and she made sandwiches. I don't remember any servants appearing, and I forget where she got those sandwiches. Meanwhile we talked. Afterwards I thought with what a sure confidence we talked to each other. "What's he done?" she said. "Do you mind knowing?" "No conscience left, thank God." "I think forgery." There was just a little pause. "Can you carry this bundle?" she asked. I lifted it. "No woman ever has respected the law, ever," she said. "It's too silly, the things it lets you do, and then pulls you up, like a mad nurse minding a child." She carried some rugs for me through the shrubbery in the darkling. "They'll think we're going mooning," she said, jerking her head at the household. "I wonder what they make of us. Criminals." An immense droning note came as if in answer to that. It startled us both for a moment. "The dears," she said. "It's the gong for dinner. But I wish I could help little Teddy, George. It's awful to think of him there with hot eyes, red and dry. And I know, the sight of me makes him feel sore. Things I said, George. If I could have seen, I'd have let him have an omnibus full of scrimgers. I cut him up. He never thought I meant it before. I'll help all I can, anyhow." I turned at something in her voice, and got a moonlight gleam of tears upon her face. "Could she have helped?" she asked abruptly. "She?" "That woman." "My God!" I cried. "Helped? Those things don't help." "Tell me again what I ought to do," she said after a silence. I went over the plans I had made for communicating, and the things I thought she might do. I had given her the address of a solicitor she might put some trust in. "But you must act for yourself," I insisted. "Roughly," I said, "it's a scramble. You must get what you can for us, and follow as you can." She nodded. She came right up to the pavilion and hovered for a time shyly, and then went away. I found my uncle in my sitting room in an armchair, with his feet upon the fender of the gas stove, which he had lit, and now he was feebly drunken with my whisky, and very weary in body and spirit, and inclined to be cowardly. "I lef' my drops," he said. He changed his clothes slowly and unwillingly. I had to bully him. I had almost to shove him to the airship and tuck him up upon its wicker flat. Single-handed I made but a clumsy start. We scraped along the roof of the shed and bent a van of the propeller, and for a time I hung underneath without his offering a hand to help me to clamber up. If it hadn't been for a sort of anchoring trolley device of Cothope's, a sort of slip anchor running on a rail, we should never have got clear at all. 5. The incidents of our flight in Lord Roberts B do not arrange themselves in any consecutive order. To think of that adventure is like dipping haphazard into an album of views. One is reminded first of this and then of that. We were both lying down on a horizontal plate of basket work. For Lord Roberts B had none of the elegant accommodation of a balloon. I lay forward, and my uncle behind me, in such a position that he could see hardly anything of our flight. We were protected from rolling over simply by netting between the steel stays. It was impossible for us to stand up at all. We had either to lie or crawl on all fours over the basket work. Amidships were lockers made of Watson's all-light material, and between those it was that I had put my uncle, wrapped in rugs. I wore sealskin motoring boots and gloves, and a motoring fur coat over my tweeds, and I controlled the engine by Bowden wires and levers forward. The early part of that night's experience was made up of warmth, of moonlit Surrey and Sussex landscape, and of a rapid and successful flight, ascending and swooping and then ascending again southward. I could not watch the clouds because the airship overhung me. I could not see the stars nor gauge the meteorological happening, but it was fairly clear to me that a wind shifting between north and northeast was gathering strength, and after I had satisfied myself by a series of entirely successful expansions and contractions of the real airworthiness of Lord Roberts B, I stopped the engine to save my petrol, and let the monster drift, checking its progress by the dim landscape below. My uncle lay quite still behind me, saying little and staring in front of him, and I was left to my own thoughts and sensations. My thoughts, whatever they were, have long since faded out of memory, and my sensations have merged into one continuous memory of a countryside lying, as it seemed, under snow, with square patches of dimness, white phantoms of roads, rents and pools of velvety blackness, and lamp-jewelled houses. I remember a train boring its way like a hastening caterpillar of fire across the landscape, and how distinctly I heard its clatter. Every town and street was buttoned with street lamps. I came quite close to the South Downs near Lewes, and all the lights were out in the houses and the people gone to bed. We left the land a little to the east of Brighton, and by that time Brighton was well abed, and the brightly lit sea-front deserted. Then I lit out the gas chamber to its fullest extent and rose. I like to be high above water. I do not clearly know what happened in the night. I think I must have dozed, and probably my uncle slept. I remember that once or twice I heard him talking in an eager, muffled voice to himself, or to an imaginary court. But there can be no doubt the wind changed right round into the east, and that we were carried far down the channel without any suspicion of the immense leeway we were making. I remember the kind of stupid perplexity with which I saw the dawn breaking over a grey waste of water below, and realised that something was wrong. I was so stupid that it was only after the sunrise I really noticed the trend of the foam caps below and perceived we were in a severe easterly gale. Even then, instead of heading south-easterly, I set the engine going, headed south, and so continued a course that must needs have either just hit Ushant or carry us over the Bay of Biscay. I thought I was east of Cherbourg, when I was far to the west, and stopped my engine in that belief, and then set it going again. I did actually sight the coast of Brittany to the south-east in the late afternoon, and that it was woke me up to the gravity of our position. I discovered it by accident in the southeast, when I was looking for it in the southwest. I turned about east and faced the wind for some time, and finding I had no chance in its teeth, went high, where it seemed less violent, and tried to make a course southeast. It was only then that I realized what a gale I was in. I had been going westward, and perhaps even in gusts north of west, at a pace of 50 or 60 miles an hour. Then I began what I suppose would be called a fight against the east wind. One calls it a fight, but it was really almost as unlike a fight as plain sewing. The wind tried to drive me westwardly, and I tried to get as much as I could eastwardly, with the wind beating and rocking us irregularly, but by no means unbearably, for about 12 hours. My hope lay in the wind abating, and our keeping in the air and eastward of Finisterre until it did. And the chief danger was the exhaustion of our petrol. It was a long and anxious and almost meditative time. We were fairly warm and only slowly getting hungry, and except that my uncle grumbled a little and produced some philosophical reflections and began to fuss about having a temperature, we talked very little. I was tired and sulky, and chiefly worried about the engine. I had to resist a tendency to crawl back and look at it. I did not care to risk contracting our gas chamber for fear of losing gas. Nothing was less like a fight. I know that in popular magazines and so forth, all such occasions as this are depicted in terms of hysteria. Captains save their ships, engineers complete their bridges, generals conduct their battles, in a state of dancing excitement, foaming recondite technicalities at the lips. I suppose that sort of thing works up the reader, but so far as it professes to represent reality, I am convinced it is all childish nonsense. Schoolboys of 15, girls of 18, and literary men all their lives may have these squealing fits, but my own experience is that most exciting scenes are not exciting, and most of the urgent moments in life are met by steady-headed men. Neither I nor my uncle spent the night in ejaculations, nor in humorous allusions, nor any of these things. We remained lumpish. My uncle stuck in his place and grumbled about his stomach, and occasionally rambled off into expositions of his financial position and denunciations of Neal. He certainly struck out one or two good phrases for Neal, and I crawled about at rare intervals in a vague sort of way and grunted, and our basket work creaked continually, and the wind on our quarter made a sort of ruffled flapping in the wall of the gas chamber. For all our wraps, we got frightfully cold as the night wore on. I must have dozed, and it was still dark when I realized with a start that we were nearly due south of, and a long way from, a regularly flashing lighthouse, standing out before the glow of some great town, and then that the thing that had awakened me was the cessation of our engine, and that we were driving back to the west. Then, indeed, for a time I felt the grim thrill of life. I crawled forward to the cords of the release valves, made my uncle crawl forward too, and let out the gas until we were falling down through the air like a clumsy glider towards the vague greyness that was land. Something must have intervened here that I have forgotten. I saw the lights of Bordeaux when it was quite dark, a nebulous haze against black. Of that I am reasonably sure. But certainly our fall took place in the cold, uncertain light of early dawn. I am, at least, equally sure of that. And Mimizan, near where we dropped, is 50 miles from Bordeaux, whose harbour lights I must have seen. I remember coming down at last with a curious indifference, and actually rousing myself to steer, but the actual coming to earth was exciting enough. I remember our prolonged dragging landfall, and the difficulty I had to get clear, and how a gust of wind caught Lord Robertsby as my uncle stumbled away from the ropes and litter, and dropped me heavily and threw me on to my knees. Then came the realization that the monster was almost consciously disentangling itself for escape, and then the light leap of its rebound. The rope slipped out of reach of my hand. I remember running knee-deep in a salt pool in hopeless pursuit of the airship. As it dragged and rose seaward, and how only after it had escaped my uttermost effort to recapture it, did I realise that this was quite the best thing that could have happened. It drove swiftly over the sandy dunes, lifting and falling, and was hidden by a clump of wind-bitten trees. Then it reappeared much further off, and still receding. It soared for a time and sank slowly, and after that I saw it no more. I suppose it fell into the sea and got wetted with salt water and heavy, and so became deflated and sank. It was never found, and there was never a report of anyone seeing it after it escaped from me. 6. But if I find it hard to tell the story of our long flight through the air overseas, at least that dawn in France stands cold and clear and full. I see again, almost as if I saw once more with my bodily eyes, the ridges of sand rising behind the ridges of sand, grey and cold and black-browed, with an insufficient grass. I feel again the clear, cold chill of dawn, and hear the distant barking of a dog. I find myself asking again, "What shall we do now?" and trying to scheme with brain tired beyond measure. At first my uncle occupied my attention. He was shivering a good deal, and it was all I could do to resist my desire to get him into a comfortable bed at once. But I wanted to appear plausibly in this part of the world. I felt it would not do to turn up anywhere at dawn and rest. It would be altogether too conspicuous. We must rest until the day was well advanced, and then appear as road-stained pedestrians seeking a meal. I gave him most of what was left of the biscuits, emptied our flasks, and advised him to sleep, but at first it was too cold, albeit I wrapped the big fur rug around him. I was struck now by the flushed weariness of his face, and the look of age the grey stubble on his unshaved chin gave him. He sat crumpled up, shivering and coughing, munching reluctantly, but drinking eagerly and whimpering a little. A dreadfully pitiful figure to me, but we had to go through with it. There was no way out for us. Presently the sun rose over the pines, and the sand grew rapidly warm. My uncle had done eating, and sat with his wrists resting on his knees, the most hopeless-looking of lost souls. "I'm ill," he said. "I'm damnably ill. I can feel it in my skin." Then—it was horrible to me—he cried. "I ought to be in bed! I ought to be in bed! Instead of flying about." And suddenly he burst into tears. I stood up. "Go to sleep, man," I said, and took the rug from him and spread it out and rolled him up in it. "It's all very well," he protested. "I'm not young enough—" "Lift up your head," I interrupted, and put his knapsack under it. "They'll catch us here just as much as in an inn," he grumbled, and then lay still. Presently, after a long time, I perceived he was asleep. His breath came with peculiar wheezings, and every now and again he would cough. I was very stiff and tired myself, and perhaps I dozed. I don't remember. I remember only sitting, as it seemed, nigh interminably beside him, too weary even to think in that sandy desolation. No one came near us, no creature, not even a dog. I roused myself at last, feeling that it was vain to seek to seem other than abnormal, and with an effort that was like lifting a sky of lead, we made our way through the wearisome sand to a farmhouse. There I feigned even a more insufficient French than I possess naturally, and let it appear that we were pedestrians from Biarritz who had lost our way along the shore and got benighted. This explained us pretty well, I thought, and we got most heartening coffee and a cart to a little roadside station. My uncle grew more and more manifestly ill with every stage of our journey. I got him to Bayonne, where he refused at first to eat, and was afterwards very sick, and then took him shivering and collapsed up a little branch line to a frontier place called Luzon Gare. We found one homely inn with 2 small bedrooms, kept by a kindly Basque woman. I got him to bed, and that night shared his room, and after an hour or so of sleep he woke up in a raging fever, and with a wandering mind cursing Neil and repeating long, inaccurate lists of figures. He was manifestly a case for a doctor, and in the morning we got one in. He was a young man from Montpellier, just beginning to practice, and very mysterious, and technical, and modern, and unhelpful. He spoke of cold and exposure, and la grippe and pneumonia. He gave many explicit and difficult directions. I perceived it devolved upon me to organize nursing and a sick room. I installed the religieuse in the second bedroom of the inn, and took a room for myself in the inn of Port de Luzon, a quarter of a mile away. End of Book Fourth, Chapter First, Parts 4 to 6. Recording by William Tomko. Book Fourth, Chapter First, Parts 7 to 9 of Tono-Bungay. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by William Tomko. Tono-Bungay by H.G. Wells. Book Fourth, Chapter First, Parts 7 to 9. 7. And now my story converges on what, in that queer corner of refuge out of the world, was destined to be my uncle's death-bed. There is a background of the Pyrenees, of blue hills and sunlit houses, of the old castle of Luzon and a noisy cascading river, and for a foreground the dim, stuffy room whose windows both the religieuse and hostess conspire to shut, with its waxed floor, its four-poster bed, its characteristically French chairs and fireplace, its champagne bottles and dirty basins and used towels and packets of somatos on the table. And in the sickly air of the confined space, in behind the curtains of the bed, lay my little uncle, with an effect of being enthroned and secluded, or sat up, or writhed and tossed in his last dealings of life. One went and drew back the edge of the curtains if one wanted to speak to him, or look at him. Usually he was propped up against the pillows, because so he breathed more easily. He slept hardly at all. I have a confused memory of vigils and mornings and afternoons spent by that bedside, and how the religieuse hovered about me, and how meek and good and inefficient she was, and how horribly black were her nails. Other figures come and go, and particularly the doctor, a young man, plumpy rococo, in bicycling dress, with fine waxen features, a little pointed beard, and the long black frizzy hair and huge tie of a minor poet. Bright and clear-cut and irrelevant are memories of the Basque hostess of my uncle's inn, and of the family of Spanish people who entertained me and prepared the most amazingly elaborate meals for me, with soup and salad and chicken and remarkable sweets. They were all very kind and sympathetic people, systematically so, and constantly, without attracting attention, I was trying to get newspapers from home. My uncle is central to all these impressions. I have tried to make you picture him, time after time, as the young man of the Wimblehurst chemist's shop, as the shabby assistant in Tottenham Court Road, as the adventurer of the early days of Tono-Bungay, as the confident, preposterous plutocrat. And now I have to tell of him strangely changed under the shadow of oncoming death, with his skin lax and yellow and glistening with sweat, his eyes large and glassy, his countenance unfamiliar through the growth of a beard, his nose pinched and thin. Never had he looked so small as now, and he talked to me in a whispering, strained voice of great issues, of why his life had been, and whither he was going. Poor little man! That last phase is, as it were, disconnected from all the other phases. It was as if he crawled out from the ruins of his career and looked about him before he died. For he had quite clear-minded states in the intervals of his delirium. He knew he was almost certainly dying, in a way that took the burden of his cares off his mind. There was no more Neil to face, no more flights or invasions, no punishments. "It has been a great career, George," he said, "but I shall be glad to rest, glad to rest, glad to rest." His mind ran rather upon his career, and usually, I am glad to recall, with a note of satisfaction and approval. In his delirious phases he would most often exaggerate this self-satisfaction and talk of his splendours. He would pluck at the sheet and stare before him, and whisper half-audible fragments of sentences. "What is this great place? These cloud-capped towers? These any pinnacles? Lion, sky pointing, Lion House, the residence of one of our great merchant princes, terrace above terrace, reaching to the heavens, kingdoms Caesar never knew, a great poet, George, Zzz, kingdoms Caesar never knew, under entirely new management, greatness, millions, universities. He stands on the terrace, on the upper terrace, directing by the globe, directing the trade." It was hard at times to tell when his sane talk ceased and his delirium began. The secret springs of his life, the vain imaginations were revealed. I sometimes think that all the life of man sprawls abed, careless and unkempt, until it must needs clothe and wash itself and come forth seemly in act and speech for the encounter with one's fellow men. I suspect that all things unspoken in our souls partake somewhat of the laxity of delirium and dementia. Certainly from those slimy, tormented lips above the bristling grey beard came nothing but dreams and disconnected fancies. Sometimes he raved about Neil, threatened Neil. "What has he got invested?" he said. "Does he think he can escape me? If I followed him up, ruin, ruin. One would think I had taken his money." And sometimes he reverted to our airship flight. "It's too long, George, too long and too cold. I'm too old a man, too old for this sort of thing. You know you're not saving, you're killing me." Towards the end it became evident our identity was discovered. I found the press, and especially Boom's section of it, had made a sort of hue and cry for us, sent special commissioners to hunt for us, and though none of these emissaries reached us until my uncle was dead, one felt the forewash of that storm of energy. The thing got into the popular French press. People became curious in their manner towards us, and a number of fresh faces appeared about the weak little struggle that went on in the closeness behind the curtains of the bed. The young doctor insisted on consultations, and a motor car came up from Biarritz, and suddenly odd people with questioning eyes began to poke in with inquiries and help. Though nothing was said, I could feel that we were no longer regarded as simple middle-class tourists. About me as I went I perceived almost as though it trailed visibly the prestige of finance and a criminal notoriety. Local personages of a plump and prosperous quality appeared in the inn making inquiries. The Luzon priest became helpful. People watched our window, and stared at me as I went to and fro, and then we had a raid from a little English clergyman and his amiable, capable wife in severely Anglican blacks, who swooped down upon us like virtuous but resolute vultures from the adjacent village of St. Jean de Polac. The clergyman was one of those odd types that oscillate between remote country towns in England and the conduct of English church services on mutual terms in enterprising hotels abroad. A tremulous, obstinate little being with sporadic hairs upon his face, spectacles, a red button nose, and aged black raiment. He was evidently enormously impressed by my uncle's monetary greatness, and by his own inkling of our identity, and he shone and brimmed over with tact and fussy helpfulness. He was eager to share the watching of the bedside with me. He proffered services with both hands. And as I was now getting into touch with affairs in London again, and trying to disentangle the gigantic details of the smash from the papers I had succeeded in getting from Biarritz, I accepted his offers pretty generously, and began the studies in modern finance that lay before me. I had got so out of touch with the old traditions of religion that I overlooked the manifest possibility of his attacking my poor, sinking vestiges of an uncle with theological solicitudes. My attention was called to that, however, very speedily by a polite but urgent quarrel between myself and the Basque landlady as to the necessity of her hanging a cheap crucifix in the shadow over the bed where it might catch my uncle's eye, where, indeed, I found it had caught his eye. "Good Lord!" I cried. "Is that still going on?" That night the little clergyman watched, and in the small hours he raised a false alarm that my uncle was dying, and made an extraordinary fuss. He raised the house. I shall never forget that scene, I think, which began with a tapping at my bedroom door just after I had fallen asleep, and his voice. "If you want to see your uncle before he goes, you must come now." The stuffy little room was crowded when I reached it, and lit by 3 flickering candles. I felt I was back in the 18th century. There lay my poor uncle amidst indescribably tumbled bedclothes, weary of life beyond measure, weary and rambling, and the little clergyman trying to hold his hand and his attention, and repeating over and over again, "Mr. Ponderevo, Mr. Ponderevo, it is all right, it is all right. Only believe, believe on me and ye shall be saved." Close at hand was a doctor with one of those cruel and idiotic injection needles modern science puts in the hands of these half-educated young men, keeping my uncle flickeringly alive for no reason whatever. The religieuse hovered sleepily in the background with an overdue and neglected dose. In addition, the landlady had not only got up herself, but roused an aged crone of a mother and a partially imbecile husband, and there was also a fattish, stolid man in grey alpaca with an air of importance. Who he was and how he got there, I don't know. I rather fancy the doctor explained him to me in French I did not understand. And they were all there, wearily nocturnal, hastily and carelessly dressed, intent upon the life that flickered and sank, making a public and curious show of its going, queer shapes of human beings lit by 3 uncertain candles, and every soul of them keenly and avidly resolved to be in at the death. The doctor stood. The others were all sitting on chairs the landlady had brought in and arranged for them. And my uncle spoilt the climax and did not die. I replaced the little clergyman on the chair by the bedside, and he hovered about the room. "I think," he whispered to me mysteriously as he gave place to me, "I believe it is well with him." I heard him trying to render the stock phrases of Low Church piety into French for the benefit of the stolid man in grey alpaca. Then he knocked a glass off the table and scrabbled for the fragments. From the first I doubted the theory of an immediate death. I consulted the doctor in urgent whispers. I turned round to get champagne and nearly fell over the clergyman's legs. He was on his knees at the additional chair the Basque landlady had got on my arrival, and he was praying aloud, "O Heavenly Father, have mercy on this thy child." I hustled him up and out of the way, and in another minute he was down at another chair praying again, and barring the path of the religieuse who had found me the corkscrew. Something put into my head that tremendous blasphemy of Carlyle's about "the last mew of a drowning kitten." He found a third chair vacant presently. It was as if he was playing a game. "Good heavens!" I said, "we must clear these people out." And with a certain urgency I did. I had a temporary lapse of memory and forgot all my French. I drove them out mainly by gesture, and opened the window, to the universal horror. I intimated the death scene was postponed, and, as a matter of fact, my uncle did not die until the next night. I did not let the little clergyman come near him again, and I was watchful for any sign that his mind had been troubled. But he made none. He talked once about "that parson chap." "Didn't bother you?" I asked. "Wanted something," he said. I kept silence, listening keenly to his mutterings. I understood him to say they wanted too much. His face puckered like a child's going to cry. "You can't get a safe 6%," he said. I had for a moment a wild suspicion that those urgent talks had not been altogether spiritual, but that, I think, was a quite unworthy and unjust suspicion. The little clergyman was as simple and honest as the day. My uncle was simply generalizing about his class. But it may have been these talks that set loose some long dormant string of ideas in my uncle's brain, ideas the things of this world had long suppressed and hidden altogether. Near the end he suddenly became clear-minded and lucid, albeit very weak, and his voice was little but clear. "George," he said. "I'm here," I said, "close beside you. George, you have always been responsible for the science. George, you know better than I do. Is it proved?" "What proved?" "Either way. I don't understand. Death ends all. After so much, such splendid beginnin's, somewhere, something." I stared at him amazed. His sunken eyes were very grave. "What do you expect?" I said in wonder. He would not answer. "Aspirations," he whispered. He fell into a broken monologue, regardless of me. "Trailing clouds of glory," he said, "and first-rate poet. First-rate. George was always hard. Always." For a long time there was silence. Then he made a gesture that he wished to speak. "Seems to me, George—" I bent my head down, and he tried to lift his hand to my shoulder. I raised him a little on his pillows and listened. "It seems to me, George, always, there must be something in me that won't die." He looked at me as though the decision rested with me. "I think," he said, "something." Then for a moment his mind wandered. "Just a little link," he whispered almost pleadingly, and lay quite still, but presently he was uneasy again. "Some other world." "Perhaps," I said. "Who knows?" "Some other world." "Not the same scope for enterprise," I said. "No." He became silent. I sat leaning down to him, and following out my own thoughts, and presently the religieuse resumed her periodic conflict with the window fastening. For a time he struggled for breath. It seemed such nonsense that he should have to suffer so, poor silly little man. "George," he whispered, and his weak little hand came out. "Perhaps—" He said no more, but I perceived from the expression of his eyes that he thought the question had been put. "Yes, I think so," I said stoutly. "Aren't you sure?" "Oh, practically sure," said I, and I think he tried to squeeze my hand. And there I sat, holding his hand tight and trying to think what seeds of immortality could be found in all his being, what sort of ghost there was in him to wander out into the bleak immensities. Queer fancies came to me. He lay still for a long time, save for a brief struggle or so for breath, and ever and again I wiped his mouth and lips. I fell into a pit of thought. I did not remark at first the change that was creeping over his face. He lay back on his pillow, made a faint zing sound that ceased, and presently and quite quietly he died, greatly comforted by my assurance. I do not know when he died. His hand relaxed insensibly. Suddenly, with a start, with a shock, I found that his mouth had fallen open, and that he was dead. 8. It was dark night when I left his deathbed and went back to my own inn down the straggling street of Luzon. That return to my inn sticks in my memory also as a thing apart, as an experience apart. Within was a subdued bustle of women, a flitting of lights, and the doing of petty offices to that queer, exhausted thing that had once been my active and urgent little uncle. For me those offices were irksome and impertinent. I slammed the door and went out into the warm, foggy drizzle of the village street, lit by blurred specks of light in great voids of darkness, and never a soul abroad. That warm veil of fog produced an effect of vast seclusion. The very houses by the roadside peered through it as if from another world. The stillness of the night was marked by an occasional remote baying of dogs. All these people kept dogs because of the near neighbourhood of the frontier. Death. It was one of those rare seasons of relief, when for a little time one walks a little outside of and beside life. I felt as I sometimes feel after the end of a play. I saw the whole business of my uncle's life as something familiar and completed. It was done, like a play one leaves, like a book one closes. I thought of the push and the promotions, the noise of London, the crowded various company of people through which our lives had gone, the public meetings, the excitements, the dinners and disputations, and suddenly it appeared to me that none of these things existed. It came to me like a discovery that none of these things existed. Before and after I have thought and called life a phantasmagoria, but never have I felt its truth as I did that night. We had parted. We two, who had kept company so long, had parted. But there was, I knew, no end to him or me. He had died a dream death, and ended a dream. His pain dream was over. It seemed to me almost as though I had died too. What did it matter, since it was unreality, all of it, the pain and desire, the beginning and the end? There was no reality except this solitary road, this quite solitary road, along which one went rather puzzled, rather tired. Part of the fog became a big mastiff that came towards me and stopped and slunk round me growling, barked gruffly, and shortly and presently became fog again. My mind swayed back to the ancient beliefs and fears of our race. My doubts and disbeliefs slipped from me like a loosely fitting garment. I wondered quite simply what dogs bayed about the path of that other walker in the darkness, what shapes, what lights, it might be, loomed about him as he went his way from our last encounter on earth, along the paths that are real and the way that endures for ever. 9. Last belated figure in that grouping round my uncle's deathbed is my aunt. When it was beyond all hope that my uncle could live, I threw aside whatever concealment remained to us and telegraphed directly to her. But she came too late to see him living. She saw him calm and still, strangely unlike his habitual garrulous animation, an unfamiliar inflexibility. "It isn't like him," she whispered, awed by his alien dignity. I remember her chiefly as she talked and wept upon the bridge below the old castle. We had got rid of some amateurish reporters from Biarritz, and had walked together in the hot morning sunshine down through Port Luzon. There, for a time, we stood leaning on the parapet of the bridge and surveying the distant peaks, the rich blue masses of the Pyrenees. For a long time we said nothing, and then she began talking. "Life's a rum go, George," she began. "Who would have thought, when I used to darn your stockings at old Wimblehurst, that this would be the end of the story? It seems far away now. That little shop. His and my first home. The glow of the bottles, the big coloured bottles. Do you remember how the light shone on the mahogany drawers? The little gilt letters? Old Amjig and Snap. I can remember it all, bright and shining like a Dutch picture. Real. And yesterday. And here we are in a dream. You a man, and me an old woman, George. And poor little Teddy, who used to rush about and talk, making that noise he did. Oh!" She choked and the tears flowed unrestrained. She wept, and I was glad to see her weeping. She stood leaning over the bridge, her tear-wet handkerchief gripped in her clenched hand. Just an hour in the old shop again, and him talking. Before things got done, before they got hold of him and fooled him. Men oughtn't to be so tempted with business and things. "They didn't hurt him, George?" she asked suddenly. For a moment I was puzzled. "Here, I mean," she said. "No," I lied stoutly, suppressing the memory of that foolish injection needle I had caught the young doctor using. "I wonder, George, if they'll let him talk in heaven." She faced me. "Oh, George dear, my heart aches, and I don't know what I say and do. Give me your arm to lean on. It's good to have you, dear, and lean upon you. Yes, I know you care for me. That's why I'm talking. We've always loved one another, and never said anything about it. And you understand, and I understand. But my heart's torn to pieces by this, torn to rags, and things drop out I've kept in it. It's true he wasn't a husband much for me at the last. But he was my child, George. He was my child, and all my children, my silly child. And life has knocked him about for me, and I've never had a say in the matter, never a say. It's puffed him up and smashed him like an old bag, under my eyes. I was clever enough to see it, and not clever enough to prevent it, and all I could do was to jeer. I've had to make what I could of it, like most people, like most of us. But it wasn't fair, George. It wasn't fair. Life and death. Great serious things. Why couldn't they leave him alone, and his lies and ways? If we could see the lightness of it. Why couldn't they leave him alone? She repeated in a whisper as we went towards the inn. End of Book Fourth, Chapter First, Parts 7 to 9. Recording by William Tomko. Book Fourth, Chapter Second, Parts 1 to 4 of Tono-Bungay. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by William Tomko. Tono-Bungay by H.G. Wells. Book Fourth, Chapter Second, Parts 1 to 4. Chapter the Second. Love Among the Wreckage. 1. When I came back, I found that my share in the escape and death of my uncle had made me for a time a notorious and even popular character. For 2 weeks I was kept in London facing the music, as he would have said, and making things easy for my aunt, and I still marvel at the consideration with which the world treated me. For now it was open and manifest that I and my uncle were no more than specimens of a modern species of brigand, wasting the savings of the public out of the sheer wantonness of enterprise. I think that, in a way, his death produced a reaction in my favour and my flight, of which some particulars now appeared stuck in the popular imagination. It seemed a more daring and difficult feat than it was, and I couldn't very well write to the papers to sustain my private estimate. There can be little doubt that men infinitely prefer the appearance of dash and enterprise to simple honesty. No one believed I was not an arch plotter in his financing. Yet they favoured me. I even got permission from the trustee to occupy my chalet for a fortnight, while I cleared up the mass of papers, calculations, notes of work, drawings, and the like that I left in disorder when I started on that impulsive raid upon the Mordet quap heaps. I was there alone. I got work for Cothope with the Ilchesters, for whom I now built these destroyers. They wanted him at once, and he was short of money, so I let him go and managed very philosophically by myself. But I found it hard to fix my attention on aeronautics. I had been away from the work for a full half-year and more, a half-year crowded with intense, disconcerting things. For a time my brain refused these fine problems of balance and adjustment altogether. It wanted to think about my uncle's dropping jaw, my aunt's reluctant tears, about dead negroes and pestilential swamps, about the evident realities of cruelty and pain, about life and death. Moreover, it was weary with the frightful pile of figures and documents at the Hardingham, a task to which this raid to Lady Grove was simply an interlude. And there was Beatrice. On the second morning, as I sat out upon the veranda recalling memories and striving in vain to attend to some 2 succinct pencil notes of Cothope's, Beatrice rode up suddenly from behind the pavilion, and pulled rein and became still. Beatrice, a little flushed from riding and sitting on a big black horse. I did not instantly rise. I stared at her. "You!" I said. She looked at me steadily. "Me," she said. I did not trouble about any civilities. I stood up and asked point-blank a question that came into my head. "Whose horse is that?" I said. She looked me in the eyes. "Carnaby's," she answered. "How did you get here?" "This way." "The wall's down." "Down?" Already? A great bit of it between the plantations. And you rode through and got here by chance? I saw you yesterday, and I rode over to see you. I had now come close to her and stood looking up into her face. I'm a mere vestige, I said. She made no answer, but remained regarding me steadfastly with a curious air of proprietorship. You know, I'm the living survivor now of the great smash. I'm rolling and dropping down through all the scaffolding of the social system. It's all a chance whether I roll out free at the bottom or go down a crack into the darkness out of sight for a year or two. The sun, she remarked irrelevantly, has burnt you. I'm getting down. She swung herself down into my arms and stood beside me face to face. Where's Cothope? She asked. Gone. Her eyes flitted to the pavilion and back to me. We stood close together, extraordinarily intimate, and extraordinarily apart. I've never seen this cottage of yours, she said, and I want to. She flung the bridle of her horse around the veranda post, and I helped her tie it. Did you get what you went for to Africa? She asked. No, I said. I lost my ship. And that lost everything? Everything. She walked before me into the living room of the chalet, and I saw that she gripped her riding whip very tightly in her hand. She looked about her for a moment, and then at me. It's comfortable, she remarked. Our eyes met in a conversation very different than the one upon our lips. A sombre glow surrounded us, drew us together, an unwonted shyness kept us apart. She roused herself, after an instant's pause, to examine my furniture. You have chintz curtains. I thought men were too feckless to have curtains without a woman. But of course your aunt did that. And a couch, and a brass fender, and... Is that a pianola? That is your desk. I thought men's desks were always untidy, and covered with dust and tobacco ash. She flitted to my colour prints and my little case of books. Then she went to the pianola. I watched her intently. "Does this thing play?" she said. "What?" I asked. "Does this thing play?" I roused myself from my preoccupation. Like a musical gorilla with fingers all of one length, and a sort of soul, it's all the world of music to me. "What did you play?" "Beethoven, when I want to clear up my head while I'm working. He is... how one would always like to work. Sometimes Chopin, and those others, but Beethoven. Beethoven mainly." "Yes." Silence again between us. She spoke with an effort. "Play me something." She turned from me and explored the rack of music rolls, became interested and took a piece, the first part of the Kreutzer Sonata. Hesitated. "No," she said, "that." She gave me Brahms' Second Concerto, Opus 58, and curled up on the sofa watching me as I set myself slowly to play. "I say," she said when I had done, "that's fine. I didn't know those things could play like that. I'm all astir." She came and stood over me, looking at me. "I'm going to have a concert," she said abruptly, and laughed uneasily and hovered at the pigeonholes. Now, what shall I have?" She chose more of Brahms. Then we came to the Kreutzer Sonata. It is queer how Tolstoy has loaded that with suggestions, debauched it, made it a scandalous and intimate symbol. When I had played the first part of that, she came up to the pianola and hesitated over me. I sat stiffly, waiting. Suddenly she seized my downcast head and kissed my hair. She caught at my face between her hands and kissed my lips. I put my arms about her and we kissed together. I sprang to my feet and clasped her. "Beatrice," I said, "Beatrice." "My dear," she whispered, nearly breathless, with her arms about me. "Oh, my dear." 2. Love, like everything else in this immense process of social disorganisation in which we live, is a thing adrift, a fruitless thing broken away from its connections. I tell of this love affair here because of its irrelevance, because it is so remarkable that it should mean nothing, and be nothing except itself. It glows in my memory like some bright casual flower starting up amidst the debris of a catastrophe. For nearly a fortnight we two met and made love together. Once more this mighty passion. Then our aimless civilization has fettered and maimed and sterilized and debased, gripped me and filled me with passionate delights and solemn joys that were all, you know, futile and purposeless. Once more I had the persuasion. This matters. Nothing else matters so much as this. We were both infinitely grave in such happiness as we had. I do not remember any laughter at all between us. 12 days it lasted from that encounter in my chalet until our parting. Except at the end, they were days of supreme summer, and there was a waxing moon. We met recklessly day by day. We were so intent upon each other at first, so intent upon expressing ourselves to each other and getting at each other, that we troubled very little about the appearance of our relationship. We met almost openly. We talked of 10,000 things and of ourselves. We loved. We made love. There is no prose of mine that can tell of ours transfigured. The facts are nothing. Everything we touched, the meanest things, became glorious. How can I render bare tenderness and delight and mutual possession? I sit here at my desk thinking of untellable things. I have come to know so much of love that I know now what love might be. We loved, scarred and stained, we parted, basely and inevitably, but at least I met love. I remember, as we sat in a Canadian canoe, in a reedy, bush-masked shallow we had discovered operating out of that pine-shaded Woking Canal, how she fell talking of the things that happened to her before she met me again. She told me things, and they so joined and welded together other things that lay disconnected in my memory that it seemed to me I had always known what she told me. And yet indeed I had not known nor suspected it, save perhaps for a luminous, transitory suspicion ever and again. She made me see how life had shaped her. She told me of her girlhood after I had known her. We were poor and pretending and managing. We hacked about on visits and things. I ought to have married. The chances I had weren't particularly good chances. I didn't like 'em. She paused. Then Carnaby came along. I remained quite still. She spoke now with downcast eyes, and one finger just touching the water. "One gets bored beyond redemption. One does about to these huge expensive houses, I suppose. The scale's immense. One makes oneself useful to the other women and agreeable to the men. One has to dress. One has food and exercise and leisure. It's the leisure and the space and the blank opportunity it seems a sin not to fill. Carnaby isn't like the other men. He's bigger. They go about making love. Everybody's making love. I did, and I don't do things by halves." She stopped. "You knew?" she asked, looking up quite steadily. I nodded. "Since when?" "Those last days. It hasn't seemed to matter really. I was a little surprised." She looked at me quietly. "Cothope knew," she said, "by instinct. I could feel it." "I suppose," I began. "Once this would have mattered immensely. Now—" "Nothing matters," she said, completing me. "I felt I had to tell you. I wanted you to understand why I didn't marry you with both hands. I have loved you," she paused, "have loved you ever since the day I kissed you in the bracken. Only I forgot." And suddenly she dropped her face upon her hands and sobbed passionately. "I forgot! I forgot!" she cried, and became still. I dabbled my paddle in the water. "Look here," I said, "forget again. Here am I, a ruined man. Marry me." She shook her head without looking up. We were still for a long time. "Marry me," I whispered. She looked up, twined back a wisp of hair, and answered dispassionately. "I wish I could. Anyhow, we have had this time. It has been a fine time. Has it been for you also? I haven't nudged you all I had to give. It's a poor gift, except for what it means and might have been. But we are near the end of it now." "Why?" I asked. "Marry me. Why should we two—" "You think," she said, "I could take courage and come to you and be your everyday wife, while you work and are poor?" "Why not?" said I. She looked at me gravely with extended finger. "Do you really think that of me? Haven't you seen me—all?" I hesitated. "Never once have I really meant marrying you," she insisted. "Never once. I fell in love with you from the first, but when you seemed a successful man, I told myself I wouldn't. I was love-sick for you, and you were so stupid I came near it then. But I knew I wasn't good enough. What could I have been to you? A woman with bad habits and bad associations. A woman smirched. And what would I do for you or be to you? If I wasn't good enough to be a rich man's wife, I'm certainly not good enough to be a poor one's. Forgive me for talking sense to you now, but I wanted to tell you this somehow." She stopped at my gesture. I sat up, and the canoe rocked with my movement. "I don't care," I said. "I want to marry you and make you my wife." "No," she said. "Don't spoil things. That is impossible." "Impossible! Think! I can't do my own hair. Do you mean you will get me a maid?" "Good God!" I cried, disconcerted beyond measure. "Won't you learn to do your own hair for me? Do you mean to say you can love a man—" She flung out her hands at me. "Don't spoil it!" she cried. "I have given you all I have. I have given you all I can. If I could do it, if I was good enough to do it, I would. But I am a woman spoilt and ruined, dear, and you are a ruined man. When we are making love, we're lovers, but think of the gulf between us in habits and ways of thought, in will and training, when we are not making love. Think of it, and don't think of it. Don't think of it yet. We have snatched some hours. We still may have some hours." She suddenly knelt forward toward me, with a glowing darkness in her eyes. "Who cares if it upsets?" she cried. "If you say another word I will kiss you, and go to the bottom clutching you." "I'm not afraid of that. I'm not a bit afraid of that. I'll die with you. Choose a death and I'll die with you, readily. Do listen to me. I love you. I shall always love you. It's because I love you that I won't go down to become a dirty familiar thing with you amidst the grime. I've given all I can. I've had all I can. Tell me," and she crept nearer, "have I been like the dusk to you? Like the warm dusk? Is there magic still? Listen to the ripple of water from your paddle. Look at the warm evening lights in the sky. Who cares if the canoe upsets? Come nearer to me. Oh, my love, come near. So." She drew me to her, and our lips met. 3. I asked her to marry me once again. It was our last morning together, and we had met very early, about sunrise, knowing that we were to part. No sun shone that day. The sky was overcast, the morning chilly and lit by a clear, cold, spiritless light. A heavy dampness in the air verged close on rain. When I think of that morning, it has always the quality of greying ashes wet with rain. Beatrice, too, had changed. The spring had gone out of her movement. It came to me, for the first time, that some day she might grow old. She had become one flesh with the rest of common humanity. The softness had gone from her voice and manner. The dusky magic of her presence had gone. I saw these things with perfect clearness, and they made me sorry for them and for her. But they altered my love not a whit, abated it nothing. And when we had talked awkwardly for half a dozen sentences, I came dully to my point. "And now," I cried, "will you marry me?" "No," she said. "I shall keep to my life here." I asked her to marry me in a year's time. She shook her head. "This world is a soft world," I said, "in spite of my present disasters. I know now how to do things. If I had you to work for, in a year I could be a prosperous man." "No," she said. "I will put it brutally. I shall go back to Carnaby." "But—" I did not feel angry. I had no sort of jealousy, no wounded pride, no sense of injury. I had only a sense of grey desolation, of hopeless cross purposes. "Look here," she said, "I have been awake all night and every night. I have been thinking of this, every moment when we have not been together. I'm not answering you on an impulse. I love you. I love you. I'll say that over 10,000 times, but here we are." "The rest of life together," I said. "It wouldn't be together. Now we are together. Now we have been together. We are full of memories. I do not feel I can even forget a single one." "Nor I. And I want to close it and leave it at that. You see, dear, what else is there to do?" She turned her white face to me. "All I know of love, all I have ever dreamt or learnt of love, I have packed into these days for you. You think we might live together and go on loving. No. For you I will have no vain repetitions. You have had the best and all of me. Would you have us, after this, meet again in London or Paris or somewhere, scuffle to some wretched dressmaker's, meet in a cabinet particular?" "No," I said. "I want you to marry me. I want you to play the game of life with me as an honest woman should. Come and live with me. Be my wife and squaw. Bear me children." I looked at her white, drawn face, and it seemed to me I might carry her yet. I spluttered for words. "My God, Beatrice!" I cried, "but this is cowardice and folly. Are you afraid of life? You, of all people! What does it matter what has been or what we were? Here we are with the world before us. Start clean and new with me. We'll fight it through. I'm not such a simple lover that I'll not tell you plainly when you go wrong, and fight our difference out with you. It's the one thing I want, the one thing I need, to have you, and more of you, and more. This love-making, it's love-making. It's just a part of us, an incident." She shook her head and stopped me abruptly. "It's all," she said. "All?" I protested. "I'm wiser than you, wiser beyond words." She turned her eyes to me and they shone with tears. "I wouldn't have you say anything but what you're saying," she said. "But it's nonsense, dear. You know it's nonsense as you say it." I tried to keep up the heroic note, but she would not listen to it. "It's no good," she cried almost petulantly. "This little world has made us what we are. Don't you see? Don't you see what I am? I can make love. I can make love and be loved prettily. Dear, don't blame me. I haven't given you all I have. If I had anything more, I have gone through it all over and over again, thought it out. This morning my head aches, my eyes ache. The light has gone out of me and I am a sick and tired woman. But I'm talking wisdom, bitter wisdom. I couldn't be any sort of helper to you, any sort of wife, any sort of mother. I'm spoilt. I'm spoilt by this rich idle way of living, until every habit is wrong, every taste wrong. The world is wrong. People can be ruined by wealth just as much as by poverty. Do you think I wouldn't face life with you if I could, if I wasn't absolutely certain I should be down and dragging in the first half-mile of the journey? Here I am, damned, damned! But I won't damn you. You know what I am. You know. You are too clear and simple not to know the truth. You try to romance and hector, but you know the truth. I am a little cad, sold and done. My dear, you think I've been misbehaving, but all these days I've been on my best behaviour. You don't understand because you're a man. A woman, when she's spoiled, is spoiled. She's dirty in grain. She's done." She walked on, weeping. "You're a fool to want me," she said. "You're a fool to want me, for my sake just as much as yours. We've done all we can. It's just romancing." She dashed the tears from her eyes and turned upon me. "Don't you understand?" she challenged. "Don't you know?" We faced one another in silence for a moment. "Yes," I said, "I know." For a long time we spoke never a word, but walked on together, slowly and sorrowfully, reluctant to turn about towards our parting. When at last we did, she broke silence again. "I've had you," she said. "Heaven and hell," I said, "can't alter that." "I've wanted," she went on, "I've talked to you in the nights and made up speeches. Now when I want to make them I'm tongue-tied. But to me it's just as if the moments we have had lasted for ever. Moods and states come and go. To-day my light is out." To this day I cannot determine whether she said, or whether I imagine she said, chloral. Perhaps a half-conscious diagnosis flashed it on my brain. Perhaps I am the victim of some perverse imaginative freak of memory, some hinted possibility that scratched and seared. There the word stands in my memory as if it were written in fire. We came to the door of Lady Osprey's garden at last, and it was beginning to drizzle. She held out her hands and I took them. "Yours," she said, in a weary, unimpassioned voice, "all that I had, such as it was. Will you forget?" "Never," I answered. "Never a touch or a word of it?" "No." "You will," she said. We looked at one another in silence, and her face full of fatigue and misery. What could I do? What was there to do? "I wish," I said, and stopped. "Good-bye." 4. That should have been the last I saw of her, but indeed I was destined to see her once again. 2 days after I was at Lady Grove, I forget altogether upon what errand, and as I walked back to the station believing her to be gone away, she came upon me, and she was riding with Carnaby, just as I had seen them first. The encounter jumped upon us unprepared. She rode by, her eyes dark in her white face, and scarcely noticed me. She winced and grew stiff at the sight of me, and bowed her head, but Carnaby, because he thought I was a broken and discomfited man, saluted me with an easy friendliness and shouted some genial commonplace to me. They passed out of sight and left me by the roadside. And then, indeed, I tasted the ultimate bitterness of life. For the first time I felt utter futility, and was wrung by emotion that begot no action, by shame and pity beyond words. I had parted from her dully, and I had seen my uncle break and die with dry eyes and a steady mind. But this chance sight of my lost Beatrice brought me to tears. My face was wrung, and tears came pouring down my cheeks. All the magic she had for me had changed to wild sorrow. "Oh God!" I cried, "this is too much!" and turned my face after her, and made appealing gestures to the beech trees and cursed at fate. I wanted to do preposterous things, to pursue her, to save her, to turn life back so that she might begin again. I wonder what would have happened had I overtaken them in pursuit, breathless with running, uttering incoherent words, weeping, expostulatory. I came near to doing that. There was nothing in earth or heaven to respect my curses or weeping. In the midst of it a man who had been trimming the opposite hedge appeared and stared at me. Abruptly, ridiculously, I dissembled before him and went on and caught my train. But the pain I felt then I have felt 100 times. It is with me as I write. It haunts this book, I see. That is what haunts this book, from end to end. End of Book Fourth, Chapter Second, Parts 1 to 4. Recording by William Tomko. Book Fourth, Chapter Third, Parts 1 to 4 of Tono-Bungay. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by William Tomko. Tono-Bungay by H.G. Wells. Book Fourth, Chapter Third, Parts 1 to 4. Chapter the Third, Night and the Open Sea. 1. I have tried throughout all this story to tell things as they happened to me. In the beginning the sheets are still here on the table, grimy and dog's-eared and old-looking. I said I wanted to tell myself and the world in which I found myself, and I have done my best. But whether I have succeeded I cannot imagine. All this writing is grey now, and dead and trite and unmeaning to me. Some of it I know by heart. I am the last person to judge it. As I turn over the big pile of manuscript before me, certain things become clearer to me, and particularly the immense inconsequences of my experiences. It is, I see now that I have it all before me, a story of activity and urgency and sterility. I have called it Tono-Bungay, but I had far better have called it waste. I have told of childless Marion, of my childless aunt, of Beatrice, wasted and wasteful and futile. What hope is there for a people whose women become fruitless? I think of all the energy I have given to vain things. I think of my industrious scheming with my uncle, of Crest Hill's vast cessation, of his resonant, strenuous career. 10,000 men have envied him and wished to live as he lived. It is all one spectacle of forces running to waste, of people who use and do not replace, the story of a country hectic with the wasting aimless fever of trade and money-making and pleasure-seeking. And now I build destroyers. Other people may see this country in other terms. This is how I have seen it. In some early chapter in this heap I compared all our present color and abundance to October foliage, before the frosts nip down the leaves. That I still feel was a good image. Perhaps I see wrongly. It may be I see decay all about me because I am, in a sense, decay. To others it may be a scene of achievement and construction radiant with hope. I, too, have a sort of hope, but it is a remote hope, a hope that finds no promise in this empire or in any of the great things of our time. How they will look in history I do not know. How time and chance will prove them I cannot guess. That is how they have mirrored themselves on one contemporary mind. 2. Concurrently with writing the last chapter of this book, I have been much engaged by the affairs of a new destroyer we have completed. It has been an oddly complementary alternation of occupations. 3 weeks or so ago this novel had to be put aside in order that I might give all my time, day and night, to the fitting and finishing of the engines. Last Thursday X2, for so we call her, was done, and I took her down the Thames and went out nearly to Texel for a trial of speed. It is curious how at times one's impressions will all fuse and run together into a sort of unity and become continuous with things that have hitherto been utterly alien and remote. That rush down the river became mysteriously connected with this book. As I passed down the Thames, I seemed, in a new and parallel manner, to be passing all England in review. I saw it then as I had wanted my readers to see it. The thought came to me slowly as I picked my way through the Pool. It stood out clear as I went dreaming into the night out upon the wide North Sea. It wasn't so much thinking at the time as a sort of photographic thought that came and grew clear. X2 went ripping through the dirty oil water as scissors rip through canvas, and the front of my mind was all intent with getting her through under the bridges and in and out among the steamboats and barges and rowing boats and piers. I lived with my hands and eyes hard ahead. I thought nothing then of any appearances but obstacles. But for all that, the back of my mind took the photographic memory of it complete and vivid. This, it came to me, is England. That is what I wanted to give in my book. This. We started in the late afternoon. We throbbed out of our yard above Hammersmith Bridge, fussed about for a moment, and headed downstream. We came at an easy rush down Craven Reach, past Fulham and Hurlingham, past the long stretches of muddy meadow and muddy suburb to Battersea and Chelsea, round the cape of tidy frontage that is Grosvenor Road, and under Vauxhall Bridge, and Westminster opened before us. We cleared a string of coal barges, and there on the left in the October sunshine stood the Parliament Houses, and the flag was flying and Parliament was sitting. I saw it at the time unseeingly, Afterwards it came into my mind as the centre of the whole broad panoramic effect of that afternoon. The stiff square lace of Victorian Gothic with its Dutch clock of a tower came upon me suddenly, and stared and whirled past in a slow half pirouette, and became still, I know, behind me, as if watching me recede. "Aren't you going to respect me then?" it seemed to say. Not I. There, in that great pile of Victorian architecture, the landlords and the lawyers, the bishops, the railway men, and the magnates of commerce go to and fro, in their incurable tradition of commercialized Bladesovery, of meretricious gentry and nobility sold for riches. I have been near enough to know. The Irish and the Labour men run about among their feet, making a fuss, effecting little. They've got no better plans that I can see. Respect it indeed. There's a certain paraphernalia of dignity, but whom does it deceive? The king comes down in a gilt coach to open the show and wears long robes and a crown, and there's a display of stout and slender legs in white stockings, and stout and slender legs in black stockings, and artful old gentlemen in ermine. I was reminded of one congested afternoon I had spent with my aunt amidst a cluster of agitated women's hats in the Royal Gallery of the House of Lords, and how I saw the King going to open Parliament, and the Duke of Devonshire looking like a gorgeous pedlar and terribly bored with a cap of maintenance on a tray before him hung by slings from his shoulder. A wonderful spectacle. It is quaint, no doubt, this England. It is even dignified in places, and full of mellow associations. That does not alter the quality of the realities these robes conceal. The realities are greedy trade, base profit, seeking bold advertisement, and kingship and chivalry, spite of this wearing of treasured robes, are as dead among it all as that crusader my uncle championed against the nettles outside the Duffield church. I have thought much of that bright afternoon's panorama. To me, down the Thames so is to run one's hand over the pages in the Book of England from end to end. One begins in Craven Reach, and it is as if one were in the heart of old England. Behind us are Kew and Hampton Court, with their memories of kings and cardinals, and one runs at first between Fulham's Episcopal garden parties and Hurlingham's playground for the sporting instinct of our race. The whole effect is English. There is space, there are old trees, and all the best qualities of the homeland in that upper reach. Putney too looks Anglican on a dwindling scale. And then, for a stretch, the newer developments slop over. One misses Bladesover, and there come first squalid stretches of mean homes right and left, and then the dingy industrialism of the South Side, and on the north bank the polite long front of nice houses, artistic, literary, administrative people's residences, that stretches from Cheyne Walk nearly to Westminster and hides a wilderness of slums. What a long slow crescendo that is, mile after mile, with the houses crowding closer, and multiplying succession of church towers. The architectural moments, the successive bridges, until you come out into the second movement of the piece with Lambeth's old palace under your quarter and the Houses of Parliament on your bow. Westminster Bridge is ahead of you then, and through it you flash, and in a moment the round-faced clock tower cranes up to peer at you again, and New Scotland Yard squares at you, a fat beef-eater of a policeman disguised miraculously as a Bastille. For a stretch you have the essential London, you have Charing Cross railway station, heart of the world, and the Embankment on the north side with its new hotels overshadowing its Georgian and Victorian architecture, and mud and great warehouses and factories, chimneys, shot towers, advertisements on the south. The northward skyline grows more intricate and pleasing, and more does one thank God for Wren. Somerset House is as picturesque as the Civil War. One is reminded again of the original England. One feels in the fretted sky the quality of Restoration lace. And then comes Astor's strong box and the lawyers' inns. I had a passing memory of myself there, how once I had trudged along the embankment westward, weighing my uncle's offer of £300 a year. Through that central essential London reach I drove, and X2 bored her nose under the foam regardless of it all, like a black hound going through reeds, on what trail even I who made her cannot tell. And in this reach, too, one first meets the sea-gulls and is reminded of the sea Blackfriars one takes. Just under these two bridges, and just between them, is the finest bridge moment in the world. And behold, soaring up, hanging in the sky over a rude tumult of warehouses, over a jostling competition of traders, irrelevantly beautiful and altogether remote, St. Paul's. Of course, one says, St. Paul's. It is the very figure of whatever fineness the old Anglican culture achieved. Detached, a more dignified and chastened St. Peter's. Colder, greyer, but still ornate. It has never been overthrown, never disavowed, only the tall warehouses and all the roar of traffic have forgotten it. Every one has forgotten it. The steamships, the barges, go heedlessly by regardless of it. Intricacies of telephone wires and poles cut blackly into its thin mysteries. And presently, when in a moment the traffic permits you and you look round for it, it has dissolved like a cloud into the grey blues of the London sky. And then the traditional and ostensible England falls from you altogether. The third movement begins, the last great movement in the London Symphony, in which the trim scheme of the old order is altogether dwarfed and swallowed up. Comes London Bridge, and the great warehouses tower up about you, waving stupendous cranes. The gulls circle and scream in your ears. Large ships lie among their lighters, and one is in the port of the world. Again and again in this book I have written of England as a futile scheme overtaken by fatty degeneration and stupendous accidents of hypertrophy. For the last time I must strike that note as the memory of the dear neat little sunlit ancient Tower of London lying away in a gap among the warehouses comes back to me. That little accumulation of buildings, so provincially pleasant and dignified, overshadowed by the vulgarest, most typical exploit of modern England, the sham Gothic casings to the ironwork of the Tower Bridge. That Tower Bridge is the very balance and confirmation of Westminster's dull pinnacles and tower. That sham Gothic bridge, and the very gates of our mother of change, the sea. But after that one is a world of accident and nature, for the third part of the panorama of London is beyond all law, order, and precedence. It is the seaport and the sea. One goes down the widening reaches through a monstrous variety of shipping, great steamers, great sailing ships, trading the flags of all the world, a monstrous confusion of lighters, witches' conferences of brown-sailed barges, wallowing tugs, a tumultuous crowding and jostling of cranes and spars, and wharves and stores and assertive inscriptions. Huge vistas of dock open right and left of one, and here and there beyond and amidst it all are church towers, little patches of indescribably old-fashioned and worn-out houses, riverside pubs and the like, vestiges of townships that were long since torn to fragments and submerged in these new growths. And amidst it all no plan appears, no intention, no comprehensive desire. That is the very key of it all. Each day one feels that the pressure of commerce and traffic grew insensibly monstrous. And first this man made a wharf, and that erected a crane, and then this company set to work, and then that, and so they jostled together to make this unassimilable enormity of traffic. Through it we dodged and drove eager for the high seas. I remember how I laughed aloud at the glimpse of the name of a London County Council steamboat that ran across me. Caxton it was called, and another was Pepys, and another was Shakespeare. They seemed so wildly out of place, splashing about in that confusion. One wanted to take them out and wipe them and put them back in some English gentleman's library. Everything was alive about them, flashing, splashing, and passing, ships moving, tugs panting, hawsers taut, barges going down with men toiling at the sweeps, the water all a-swirl with the wash of shipping, scaling into millions of little wavelets, curling and frothing under the whip of the unceasing wind. Past it all we drove, and at Greenwich, to the south, you know, there stands a fine stone frontage where all the victories are recorded in a painted hall. And beside it is the Ship, where once upon a time those gentlemen of Westminster used to have an annual dinner, before the port of London got too much for them altogether. The old façade of the hospital was just warming to the sunset as we went by. And after that, right and left, the river opened, the sense of the sea increased and prevailed, reach after reach from Northfleet to the Nore. And out you come at last with the sun behind you into the Eastern Sea. You speed up and tear the oily waters louder and faster. Saroo, saroo, swish, saroo. And the hills of Kent, over which I once fled from the Christian teachings of Nicodemus Frapp, fell away on the right hand and Essex on the left. They fall away and vanish into blue haze, and the tall, slow ships behind the tugs, scarce moving ships and wallowing sturdy tugs, are all wrought of wet gold as one goes frothing by. They stand out, bound on strange missions of life and death, to the killing of men in unfamiliar lands. And now behind us is blue mystery, and the phantom flash of unseen lights. And presently even these are gone, and I and my destroyer tear out to the unknown across a great grey space. We tear into the great spaces of the future, and the turbines fall to talking in unfamiliar tongues. Out to the open we go, to windy freedom and trackless ways. Light after light goes down. England and the kingdom, Britain and the empire, the old prides and the old devotions, glide abeam, astern, sink down upon the horizon, pass, pass. The river passes, London passes, England passes. 3. This is the note I have tried to emphasize, the note that sounds clear in my mind when I think of anything beyond the purely personal aspects of my story. It is a note of crumbling and confusion, of change and seemingly aimless swelling of a bubbling up and medley of futile loves and sorrows. But through the confusion sounds another note. Through the confusion something drives, something that is at once human achievement and the most inhuman of all existing things. Something comes out of it. How can I express the values of a thing at once, so essential and so immaterial? It is something that calls upon such men as I with an irresistible appeal. I have figured it in my last section by the symbol of my destroyer, stark and swift, irrelevant to most human interests. Sometimes I call this reality science, sometimes I call it truth. But it is something we draw by pain and effort out of the heart of life, that we disentangle and make clear. Other men serve it, I know, in art, in literature, in social invention, and see it in 1,000 different figures under 100 names. I see it always as austerity, as beauty. This thing we make clear is the heart of life. It is the one enduring thing. Men and nations, epochs and civilization pass, each making its contribution. I do not know what it is, this something, except that it is supreme. It is a something, a quality, an element, one may find now in colors, now in norms, now in sounds, now in thoughts. It emerges from life with each year one lives and feels, and generation by generation, and age by age, but the how and why of it are all beyond the compass of my mind. Yet the full sense of it was with me all that night as I drove, lonely above the rush and murmur of my engines, out upon the weltering circle of the sea. Far out to the northeast there came the flicker of a squadron of warships waving white swords of light about the sky. I kept them hull down, and presently they were mere summer lightning over the watery edge of the globe. I fell into thought that was nearly formless, into doubts and dreams that have no words, and it seemed good to me to drive ahead and on and or through the windy starlight over the long black waves. 4. It was morning and day before I returned with the 4 sick and starving journalists who had got permission to come with me up the shining river and past the old grey tower. I recalled the back views of those journalists very distinctly, going with a certain damp weariness of movement, along a side street away from the river. They were good men and bore me no malice, and they served me up to the public in turgid, degenerate Kiplingese, as a modest button on the complacent stomach of the Empire. Though, as a matter of fact, X2 isn't intended for the Empire, or indeed for the hands of any European power. We offered it to our own people first, but they would have nothing to do with me, and I have long since ceased to trouble much about such questions. I have come to see myself from the outside, my country from the outside, without illusions. We make and pass. We are all things that make and pass, striving upon a hidden mission, out to the open sea. End of Book Fourth, Chapter Third, Parts 1 to 4. End of Tono-Bungay by H. G. Wells. Recording by William Tomko.